KnockBack, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to KnockBack. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined as always by my brother Dagan, Millie Moriarty. Dagan, thank you for joining me today. How are you? How's it going?
Mathlete number one right here.
Yeah, you are. You look great. You look like a mathlete with your, you have your sweater on and you look, would you go to church or something today?
I just rolled in from church.
Yeah, I knew it.
You know me too well, my friend.
Yeah.
Hey, guys. Also, hey, guys. Sorry, I didn't mean anything by it.
Whoa. How did church go?
I went in a separate car. It was because I knew we had to record. So I left right at, I did the thing. I did the breakout, which is very frowned upon in my family growing up, and Helene frowns upon this as well. I did the communion breakout. We're not going in, we're not sitting down for the extra 5 minutes spiel from the priest or whatever. I just did the breakout. Right. Graydon saw the opportunity. He broke out. He did the communion breakout thing because I had to get back. I had to get all set up. I don't know if it really saved that much time ultimately, but it's because I park very far away.
Yeah, I know. You're the worst. Like when we go to like the supermarket or something, or you have to park you park so far away from everything. God. I know you have a nice car. You've always had nice cars. I mean, you care about your car, especially now. I mean, you have the nicest car you've ever had.
Yes, that is true.
You're driving a BMW over there. So good for you, my boy. German engineering.
German engineering.
It's a Nazi car, but it's no big deal.
No, well, it's no skin off my back, my friend. How are you doing?
I was just going to say, the logo of the BMW is a prop of like a Luftwaffe plane.
Yes, I do. Yeah. Isn't that strange?
Isn't it amazing that they've never changed that? It's like you could just change the logo. Also, Volkswagen, founded by Hitler.
There you go. And they're the umbrella company for Audi and Porsche. They own Lamborghini. They own Rolls Royce or Bentley. They own Volkswagen owns a bunch of shit. Yeah, isn't that strange? I always think back to like the Americans or the Allied, soldiers or just people, Americans or just the West in general, or France, Britain, United States, and think about, the slow come around to buying Japanese and German, today it's even, you could think about like, how much of it you put aside or harbor old grudges or whatever against entire nations. But I always think about that. I always think like, look how far we've come with driving Mitsubishi, and this is the company that made this, that made the kamikaze planes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so it's amazing. Like, and to our credit, GM and Ford and everyone else were making our stuff. So that was just, that's the nature of having manufacturing, and it's important to have manufacturing for those reasons, so that if you have to go to total war again, you can just ramp up. But it is interesting, the companies that were all involved. Yeah, Mitsubishi killed hundreds of thousands of Americans.
Mitsubishi in England's side, you have Rolls Royce making the Merlin engine for the Spitfires. Like, it's really interesting, man. Yeah,
it's very cool. It's very cool. And I always love. We talked about it on our Mad Men episode a long time ago, but I always loved it's a little tough to watch, but Roger has a really hard time dealing with the Japanese businessmen that come in because he fought in World War II. And when you think about it, it was only like 16 or 17 years later or something, and these guys were like rolling in. So I understand that. I mean, I understand. It's like, what the fuck? So it is very interesting how things have accelerated. But on my end, everything's good on my end. I got up, I worked out, I cleaned a little bit, and walked the dog.
Sunday morning stuff.
Yeah, that's basically it. And we should note that we tried to record this episode yesterday. It doesn't really matter when we're recording it for you out there, but we had to stop because Dagan was having a technical problem. So we punted today. We usually don't record on Sundays, actually, so we shouldn't have this issue in the future. But today's episode, Dagan, is one I'm really excited about. We actually had been talking about this one for a while. I mean, I feel like this has been on the list for a long time. It's Freaks and Geeks. The 18 episodes, one season only, run on NBC, 1999 and 2000. It's a famous TV series, a cult hit TV series that I think was way ahead of its time, ironically, even though it's about the past. I feel like this show would have been a massive hit today if it was on like Netflix or something, especially with this cast, which is an amazing cast. Really kind of, when you look at it, like, wow. Yeah. Quite the cast you've assembled here, although at that time they were all pretty much unknowns. But it's a show that is about a high school in Michigan in the 1980-1981 school year. And so here's the thing. We've talked about this before. It's not like this mind-blowing thing anymore, but
yeah,
if there was a Freaks and Geeks made today, it would be about me in high school. And I think about that sometimes. Like, so in 2000, that show was made for people my age.
Yes.
Actually, so if you just accelerate 20 years from when this show took place, then you are in my 11th grade year. So I would be in the same exact grade that like Lindsay and all those, the freaks were in, which I find quite appealing for me today, because
that's a super interesting way to put it. Yeah.
So it allows me to
20-year lapse.
Right. So if this show is about my class, equidistant from that era, then it would be about like rap rock and Linkin Park and skate
crazy?
jeans and Tony Hawk Pro Skater and Dreamcast and like that like that's the kind of stuff that would be Y2K and all that kind of stuff. So pretty cool. You
might have something here, man, because that stuff is that you wouldn't think readily that stuff would feel so nostalgic already, but as you list off those things, it really does feel retro and nostalgic.
Well, think about it, Dave. The corollary to this show, of course, is the Wonder Years.
Of course.
Which we'll do, and we'll do the Wonder Years much deeper than we do Freaks and Geeks, not only because it's a better show than Freaks and Geeks, but because it's just longer and
much
deeper.
Longer.
But it's interesting. It seems like the 20-year gap or so is the tradition for these shows. Wonder Years came out in the late 80s, and it was about the late 60s.
Yes.
This came out in 99. It was about 1980. So just for some reason, we look back 20 years, 20-year reunion, all that kind of stuff. My 20-year reunion's coming up in a couple of years. I graduated actually not a couple of years. I graduated in 2002, 1 year.
Wow.
So,
we got to talk about that.
Yeah, I'm not going.
You're not going to go?
No way.
I really regret not doing it.
I'm not one of those guys that's like, you can all go fuck yourselves, but I am one of those guys that's like, I don't care about most of you. You didn't care about me, and I don't care about you now. So you can have fun amongst yourselves, but not really my thing. So
no curiosity about particular people or, pockets of people or...
I'm getting to the point where I can't even remember anyone's name. Like, I'm not even being facetious. Like, I think about like, who the fuck was that girl? Who was that teacher? I'm like, I don't even know. I don't remember the person's name, you know? Like the girl I like, had a crush on and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I don't even remember your name. We actually talked about that on our, on our dating episode or on our movie theater episode or whatever, where I remember this girl. I have this memory of just making out with this girl during Jurassic Park 3 or something like that, but then I don't even remember her name. Like, I don't even know who she is. Like, so it's like, that's not an insult. It's like, I don't even know who, like, so seeing these people doesn't really mean anything to me.
Yeah, I understand that. The info kind of filters out slowly as the years wear on. But I regret not going to mine. You know what I did? I went with Helene and Marcy to theirs, their 20 year, and it was pathetic. It was really, really bad. Like, it wasn't at a really nice place. Usually you think of a nice venue or a country club or something. They literally had it at a bar in town one night. And I think they might have rented out the upstairs of the bar. Like, that was the extent of it. And I felt like this is really anticlimactic. Like, you wait 20 years, have it at a nice spot, have the opportunity to dress up a little bit.
Yeah.
Bring your spouse or your significant other if you have one. Go as friends. So you're still in that. It was interesting, like those same pockets of people that you would see in the hallway your senior year are still hanging together at the bar, But I have to say, hers was pretty pathetic. But I regret not going to mine because I am curious about some of those people. You just want to see how it panned out,
Definitely. I feel like for me anyway, I think a lot of the mystique is gone because you can just find these people on Instagram or Facebook. It's
That's
not like,
true. That's a good point. Good point.
I'm interested if like, is there, because I remember in the early internet, there was like that website or that in like classmates.com. Remember that? And it was like,
oh yeah, of course.
It was like kind of an organizational tool for people to have these kinds of things. It was actually clever and ahead of its time. It got gobbled up by all the social media companies, but yeah, I don't care. But
fair enough.
The people in this episode or in this show though would be having their 20, or at least the freaks would be having their 20th anniversary or their 40th. I'm sorry, their 40th right this year, something like that next year. All right, Dig. Let's talk a little bit about this show, Freaks and Geeks. What's your impression of the show? Had you seen it before you watched it for this?
No, that was a cool thing. Like, a lot of our knockback topics are rewatches for us, whether it's a movie or a series, things that we've seen already and we're revisiting. But this one was kind of cool because I hadn't really seen it. Now, I caught it in some past airing here and there. Like maybe I sat and watched 3/4 of an episode once or twice. And that occurred to me as I was watching. I was like, oh, I've seen this before. But I never watched it back to front. I probably hadn't seen 90% of it in total. So it was a real treat for me. And, you know, you sit down to check out this legendary, but legendarily short-lived series, iconic, of course. And what I found was actually pretty surprising. I like, you know, just to wrap up what we were just talking about, the characters that these actors and actresses are portraying would have been in real life like people that are 10 years my senior. So anywhere from 7, 8 to 10 years my senior. So people that were born, I was born in 73. So these are people that could have been born in 62, 63, 64, maybe even as early as 61. So slightly older. A good analog for me was slightly older than our Aunt Carla and Aunt Joni and Uncle Mike. Just slightly younger, rather. Just slightly younger. So that was interesting because I would just think back to those contemporaries in my real life. Those kids that were on the block were usually the much older siblings of friends or acquaintances in the neighborhood. Old enough where I really didn't know them. Like that we would have had no connection or nothing in common. So I think of like people on the block, like this kid Robbie, who lived across the street, this girl Annalisa, who lives up the street, and then this girl Diane, who was the much older sister of my friend Jen on the block. So I think like this is kind of the story about what they grew up with. These are the kids that were in high school when I was around 7 or 8 years old. So that was kind of a cool connection for me. And then just thinking back to that time period, 80, 81, those are heady years. You know, my whole life being a 7, 8-year-old was Star Wars, right? This is pre-Transformers, pre-G.I. Joe, pre-skateboarding for me, pre my interest in girls. Like my whole life basically wrapped around my 3 best friends and playing with them and being with them and Star Wars. I mean, that was it. And of course your family, you know, getting lunch from mom. Like this was my whole thing. So it's an interesting thing for me. Like I think back to who I would have been watching in my real life, which was kind of an interesting and fun thing. And then what you said, it's so funny that you brought this up already. I found myself constantly, at least going in initially, comparing this to the Wonder Years, you know? And I think a lot of that, some of that was probably the whole nostalgia thing and stories set around and centered around kids and growing up, of course, a different time period for the Wonder Years in the 60s and then into the early 70s, I think. But I went in like just comparing and contrasting so much, and I was really, really surprised about what I found. I can't wait to talk about it with you with Freaks and Geeks, because it really does have its own formula. I don't know what I was expecting, but the Wonder Years was very sentimental. You know, it had this patina on it. It looked back almost through rose-colored glasses, whether it was a fond remembrance, like a first kiss, or something that was like your best friend's brother not returning from Vietnam, even something that was negative and tragic. The Wonder Years always kind of spun it with this aura of wonder. I mean, really, right? This aura of like everything looking back. It was such a, you know, when you're a kid, it's that thing where everything takes on, like even the bittersweet things, reflecting on it, it almost seems like everything was a fond memory. What I liked about Freaks and Geeks is it doesn't rely upon any of those sort of formulas. It's not a sitcom, doesn't have a laugh track. There's no cloying dialogue. It's not clever. Like, it lets moments be awkward. It really did feel, at first I was like, wow, this is really weird. Like the mom feels like she's not even an actress. Like she just felt like a real mom that you would walk into somebody's house. And I was like, wow, you know, this show is really special. It just really feels like being that age. You know, you go for a laugh and it might miss, you know, something turns into an embarrassing moment that you think was going to be a positive moment. You know, like think of the Wonder Years. They would never go into a cheerleader, like the hot girl farting. Like the Wonder Years would have never covered that. That would have been off limits. But Freaks and Geeks sort of goes into that territory, and it makes it feel very genuine. It makes it feel very real, not crude, but realistic. Even if it seems like, you know, like sort of like, I don't know, like low humor, potty humor and stuff like that. It just feels, makes the whole experience feel authentic, and you could relate to it even though you didn't grow up in high school in this time period. A lot of those things you're dealing with as a kid, memories and things with family and things with friends and social pressures and all that, this is timeless stuff. So yeah, I really, really got a kick out of it. And of course, like you said, like this starts off the careers of some people that are now iconic. You talk about Judd Apatow, Paul Feig, Seth Rogen, James Franco, Jason Segel.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, it's incredible.
Especially
with Jason Segel, who I didn't realize Jason Segel was so, I don't know, accomplished.
Oh yeah, dude.
When I was reading about him, you know, after this, when I was like kind of doing a little bit of research, I'm like, I had no idea. He almost seemed like the odd man out. It's like, oh, Jason Segel, you know, but like,
right?
He's like a really prolific writer and director. He's written a bunch of films and
smart dude too.
Yeah, he is. So I had no idea. I really didn't know that, you know, and I think one of the things about this that's again the corollary to Wild. I was gonna say Wild Arms. I'm playing Wild Arms 3. The corollary to Wonder Years is also, I think, two things. Number one, the Wonder Years, they might have had, like, Paul and Kevin might have had those kind of conversations, but because it's like in 68, 69, 70, maybe it's a little harder to have those conversations even amongst friends. Like things get a little more candid as you go on, so that like the sheer inappropriateness of humor today, for instance, is an impossibility even in private in many places 50 years ago. So I think that's number one.
True.
And I think number two is interesting is that it's taken Kevin's story and Wayne's story and put them together into one show. So in Wonder Years, we only get glimpses of Wayne, the older brother, and we get often sad glimpses of him. And yeah,
it's true.
And we never really understand him, right? We never really get a glimpse of him. We and same thing with Karen. She comes in and out, but it's about Kevin. In this one, it's Lindsay Weir is the main character, but not really. And it's really about two or even three groups of people and all of their experiences and how they come in and out of each other's circles. And I think that it makes this show really pertinent because one of the things that bothers me about the show, and because I'm rewatching it.
Okay.
I watched it for the first time in 2008 with my ex-girlfriend, my college girlfriend, like when we were like on and off after college. She came to San Francisco. I rented it off of Netflix discs and then we watched them. And I loved it. I was like, this show is awesome. And rewatching it this time, I went in with a little bit more of a critical eye. And one of the things that I'll say about this show is that if it could have done one thing better, it's let moments linger a little bit. You know, there's some really deep shit that happens in this show. And I'm not really upset that we didn't get to see more. Like, it would have been nice. It's like the Firefly argument, right? Like, it would have been nice to get another season, or Jericho, right? Like, it would have been nice to get more. But how did they use the time they had? And I feel like they didn't necessarily use it very wisely. And I don't know if it's because they expected they would get more, even though I think the last episodes were eventually burned off in the summer. Like, they just were popped out because the show wasn't doing well, which is a shame. But also because I think, like, wow, instead, like, it almost feels like every episode reshakes and everything stops and you move on to the next episode and everyone is kind of moved on. But I'm like, this is all in one school year. So they just totaled Lindsay's dad's car and she was grounded. So why isn't that part of the story anymore?
Right.
You know, the one thing that really bothered me, the one kind of hang up I had was it was Neil. That's the Jewish kid, right?
Yeah.
His dad cheating on his wife, and that's a really great episode.
Oh,
and
so good.
Then they just move on.
Yeah.
You know, and I feel like the one thing the Wonder Years did better, even though they had more time, they technically didn't, because it was 24 minutes versus 48 minutes, sitcom versus drama. Although I would argue Wonder Years is just a sitcom-like drama.
Yes.
I just feel like they were able to extract more things. We had those episodes like when Mrs. Arnold goes to take art classes, right? And like how that episode always stuck with me. Or when Karen leaves with her boyfriend, right? David Schwimmer.
Oh man, that was great.
And those things come back.
Yeah.
In the show, right? They come back, all these threads. And I just don't feel like maybe they had enough time to explore all that. And that's my one major disappointment with the show, is just like, you could have probably taken a third of these characters, throw them away. You probably could have taken half of these plot lines, thrown them away, and focus.
Yes.
You know? Focus on Nick's dad, right? And his relationship there. Focus on the business, the Weir's business and how it's going to struggle against the malls and the superstores, right? I want to hear more about these kinds of things and the politics even that we got at the end with Republican versus Democrat.
Yeah, they
and
started
Bush
to go into
coming to
that
school.
Territory.
Does that kind of resonate with you? In
dude.
other words, I don't know if I needed to see them for another year.
Yeah.
I liked coming in and out of their lives. I just wanted more drama.
Yeah, no, what you're saying makes complete sense, especially when I started the series. And again, it was nice to go in fresh and not have anything spoiled and just something that was, you have this comedy / dramedy thing. It's a different type of formula. It's really not like the Wonder Years. It's not, a sitcom. It's something really different. Feels really like a movie. And when you think about, I think they have a lot of things going on here. At first, I was really trying to get locked into an atmosphere where the Wonder Years was very, very successful at that. The Wonder Years, you think of a very specific atmosphere. It really looked like almost like a memory. In the Wonder Years, I love what you said about it being sort of told from the perspective of one kid, one age. This show does a lot. First of all, as we know, there's a lot of characters to juggle. It's being looked at from two different perspectives age-wise, but then also from two different groups, the Freaks and the Geeks. So there's a lot of POVs or vantage points. And then also a lot of it, which I found through watching interviews and reading, is very autobiographical from the perspective of not only Judd Apatow, but Paul Feig as well. And then some of the writers as well. So they were incorporating a lot of their memories, especially the writers and the people involved on the higher end of production behind the camera, the older people around their age. They all had a lot to say. They all had a lot of input. There were a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And it really did feel like the show, they were sort of groping in the dark and finding their way with it as it went along. And the show changes a lot. If you look at from the early episodes to the later episodes of the 18, it gets very, very much more complex. The shots, it gets much more atmospheric. It gets much more cinematic. You think about shots later in the show. There's a great moment that we'll get to with Ken and Tuba Girl and Amy, where he's looking for her in the hallway and he's going through all the people that are holding tubas. And the camera, it's like a tracking shot. It's like a dolly shot. It's something you would see in a movie. The show ended up reminding me of a cinematic vehicle like Fast Times, where it ended up. It was like, wow, this show is going in an amazing direction. Like they were just learning. They were really getting a feel, I think, of what they wanted to do. And I think that's a big part of the conversation too, is how tragic it is that it did end early, because I think this show would have been one of the best ever if it had time to breathe and evolve over a matter of seasons. I think they were going in an awesome direction. And it's also something that I was reading, which I didn't know, which I was really curious about, especially if in looking at the last 4 to 5 episodes, was they did know that they were going to get canceled, I think, after episode 13 was in the can, or I think it was after episode 13 aired, like 2 days after it aired. They knew that they were going to get canceled. So there was a little bit of flop sweat of like, okay, what are we going to do? We do have a lot of plates in the air. We have a lot of plates spinning. We have a lot of threads to connect. What are we going to do here? Like, they were thinking about really doing some cool stuff. Like, Neil's parents apparently were going to get divorced, and I think they indicated that. You could kind of read into that they were going in that direction. Yeah,
so she was basically, the mom's basically saying, like, we're hanging on until you're gone.
For you to be here in the house, which is really, that was an amazing arc, all the way from
it was awesome.
Neil with the garage door openers. It was amazing. And then they were going to do things, really inventive things too, which I think would have been really, really bold for TV at that time. And I would think about pre-HBO, The Sopranos was just starting out, pre-Netflix, pre-subscription, where the TV renaissance, the golden age, they were going to do things like they were going to make the Bill character into a jock, and they were going to totally change that character. You never see that in a TV show. Never. You never ever see things like that are those inventive touches where they were going to take some chances and risks and they didn't. But no, you're absolutely right. I mean, it really felt, this show might be one of the most dynamic contrasts from episode 1 through episode 18 that I've ever seen. It's really, it evolves in such an amazing way. I was really the humor was really interesting for me in the show because it wasn't as funny as I thought it was going to be all the time. You know, they weren't really they weren't hanging on to the laughs. They were making it more like a realistic situation where sometimes there's not going to be a laugh. You know, sometimes it's going to be that way.
Like what? The Wonder Years.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
So I don't know if they talk, because I didn't read too much about like the creation of the show. I would have a hard time believing that they weren't heavily inspired by the Wonder Years. There's no narration. Yeah, they do. Okay.
Yeah, Paul Feig talks about the Wonder Years. Yeah, I think it's inevitable, that conversation, because the Wonder Years was so... It's amazing that the Wonder Years isn't more in modern parlance, more in modern conversation. I think it's kind of getting forgotten about, which is a shame. And I thought Fred Savage was involved in Freaks and Geeks in a director capacity, but he wasn't. He must have directed some other Judd Apatow.
He directs a bunch of episodes of Always Sunny, which I think is hysterical.
That's awesome. That is so awesome. How cool would it be to see him behind the camera?
It's like, you can tell in Austin Powers 3 that he's way funnier than giving credit for, you know? And like, so it's cool to see him kind of be able to flex those muscles. I can't wait. We got to get to the Wonder Years, but
oh man,
I really feel like that might require, we're so passionate about that show that might require like 5 full episodes.
Yeah, we could go season by season.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
You know?
But all right, so we have a bunch of inquiries from the audience. People know that our show is supported on Patreon, patreon.com/laststandmedia. You might be listening to it there. You get early ad-free access to our episodes and the ability to submit questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, and ideas to the show. Also vote on topics that we'll do. We're doing one next week that you voted on. But and of course, all those perks go for the other shows we do too, Sacred Symbols, Defining Duke, etc. So Matthew Major wrote into us and says, "Hey bros, this is a fantastic show. So many celebrities in the show. It's a true look into high school in the 80s. I just want to know what you think about how ahead of its time this show is. I feel like it's very relevant today. Thanks for everything, bros." So, Dig, you had touched on this earlier, and I wanted to ask you about this. I mean, wouldn't this show have thrived if it was just 10 or 12 years later? I feel like we would have gotten 3 to 5 seasons on Netflix or Amazon. They would have invested a bunch of money into it. So it is ahead of its time, and it is pertinent today. And yet I'm also kind of grateful that it was left lingering. I actually had a very familiar feeling when I was watching it again. I had only watched it again for the first time since those 13 years ago with my ex-girlfriend. And I remember feeling the same feeling I felt when you see James Franco playing D&D. And I remember at that time being like, I remember being so sad. I'm like, it's clear, talking about what will happen in a future season, it's clear that he might get ingratiated with these guys a little bit. And it was awesome, like to see him like embrace them and all that. And so it left a lot of wonder. And yet I do feel like it was ahead of its time. And yet I'm not really that sad that we didn't get more. It gives us something to discuss and an example of a show that was stranded before its time. It can't, you know, I'm sure they all understand that they've just held on to this idea and pitched it later. Obviously all their careers would have been on different trajectories, and a lot of them did stay together. Obviously we see a lot of them in 40-Year-Old Virgin and others, which is completely fucking iconic comedy. So, I mean, these guys all stayed together, and they did also Undeclared together the next year.
True. Very good point.
Which is a totally different show. But I don't know. Do you feel like it is relevant today? Like what we see in the show? Because I feel like it is. It's like some things just don't change. And you had mentioned that earlier. Absolutely.
Those universal topics, you know, the trials and tribulations of growing up. And I know that was a lot of, I'm not sure about Judd Apatow, but I know that was a lot of Paul Feig's bent, was like really like making that part of the show where it's like, yes, you have the nostalgia that plays in with the music and the clothing and the cars in that period and what the kids would have been into, trends and fads and all that kind of stuff. But really what the through line is that it's just growing up, and growing up is always the same. High school, dealing with bullies, dealing with the lunchroom, where table you're going to sit at, various teachers, getting picked on, getting picked in gym class. All of those things were through lines, certainly through my life, coming up the same way these characters did 10 years later. And I know it harkens back to growing up in the 50s and 60s. I mean, in modern times, in the last, 50 or 60 years, I think this is what life has looked like. And I think it's changing now with technology, probably changed a little bit with the millennials. But I think there's still a lot there that's relatable. And, you know, it makes me think about so much. There's so much to unpack with this show, maybe more so than almost any other topic we've talked about. Like, think about it from NBC's perspective. You have a lot of these guys now, household names. I mean, some of the most powerful people in Hollywood. It's certainly very successful, all of them in their own right. But at this point, a lot of these people were at the fledgling or maybe journeyman stage of their career. Sadly, you know, when you're thinking about the bean counters and the executives, they look at that. You know, like how much weight can we put into a Judd, you know, circa 1999, 2000 Judd Apatow? It's not the same as a 2021 Paul Feig. It's not the same as a 2021 James Franco. You know, they said when James Franco walked in to audition for this part, Judd Apatow said this, I think, they were like, this guy, we have a guy here, we have to cash in. This guy doesn't know he's the next James Dean yet. And they literally said that. They walked out of the room saying, like, because I think James Franco had done a few small things before this, but, you know, he wasn't James Franco.
He's so handsome in this movie, in this show, too.
Oh, my
it's
God.
Like
he's just like everything. He's
so cool.
So handsome. He's like, you know, I have my man crush on Jude Law. It transcends time and space. Like, he ended up looking a lot. He ends up looking modern to me in the show. And maybe that's, you know, he has a timelessness to him. As he has the white T-shirts and the beanies and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, dude, he looks like a skater in like 2020. Like, he doesn't, there's so much to say just about James Franco alone. But yeah, I mean, there's so much there that I think makes this show hold up. And I really didn't like it at first. I mean, the first 3 episodes, I was like, all right. A lot of it was just being unprepared and not knowing what to expect and then trying to make things of it. I think a large part of that was the Feig family. Because not the Feig family, the Weir family.
Yeah.
Because they feel so authentic. I had never seen anything like that. You know, it feels like Mrs. Feig, Mrs. Weir rather, she feels like a real mom. I mean, just straight up.
She's great.
It's so crazy, the performances. And, you know, this show, again, there's so much to say, but doesn't rely on sitcom tropes, no laugh tracks, no snappy repartee, no pratfalls or slapstick comedy or physical comedy really of any kind, nothing sappy or contrived. It's very realistic, and a lot of it is anchored on these amazing performances. There's no one that does a bad job in this. I mean, some of the teachers feel like you just walked into a school.
Dude, the guy, I want to talk about the guidance counselor and the gym teacher because they're awesome.
Dude. So good.
They're both great characters. But let's start. I mean, we were talking about the Weir family, and I think the best way to dissect these kinds of shows, typically, as we like to do, is to go through the characters.
Yeah, that sounds good.
We should start with Lindsay, who I think ostensibly is the protagonist of the show, played by the lovely Linda Cardellini. Now, everyone knows from our Mad Men episode, although we'll get more into it, that Linda Cardellini plays, so if you're a Mad Men fan like Dagan and I are, then she plays one of the most interesting characters in that, which is Sylvia Rosen. She actually was nominated and I believe won an Academy, not an Academy Award, a Emmy for that.
She
role.
Deserves it. Oh my God.
And she's in a bunch of stuff, but that's where I know her best because that role is so awesome, especially with how it deals with Sally and all of that. And we talked about that on the show, and we'll get back into that when we do Mad Men more properly in the future. But and of course, she's in Grandma's Boy, which is like one of my favorite comedies, and she's also in random stuff like Daddy's Home and all that kind of stuff. But what did you think of her performance in this character as the anchor of the show? I must say that as a character, Lindsay is incredibly selfish, and she accuses her friends of being selfish, and they are selfish as well. She's kind of a necessary piece for everything to orbit it around, and yet I'm not really that drawn to her as a character. I'm actually drawn to all of the different nexuses that she brings into the show, and I think that might be the point. What did you think about her performance? And Linda Cardellini does a great job, I think, but what do you think of the character and all that?
Yeah, Linda Cardellini, first of all, it was like probably over the first 2 or 3 episodes where it was really bothering me. Like, I didn't draw the Sylvia Rosen line through to her yet, but it was a nettling thing. Like, I recognized her. I was like, where the hell do I know this character from? And of course, 14 years later, she would be on Mad Men. And then I was like, oh my God, that's the Mad Men character, the mistress, who Dr. Right. Rosen's wife, who's Don's having the affair with. And I was like, oh my God, that's like, when you draw that connection, it's like, holy shit, that's like almost 15 years later. But I mean, first of all, Linda Cardellini, her performance in this, you have to salute it. She's a formidable actress. She's really, really good. And everybody says that. Like when you look at interviews about the cast, they were just like, not only was she a lovely person, but like she was bringing it. Like she was just on. Like everybody anchored their performances to hers. She's really talented. It's amazing you don't hear about her. You know, her filmography is impressive and her TV work that she's done too, but
yeah, she was on ER and stuff.
Yeah, but you don't hear about her when you speak about the Meryl Streeps and stuff. I think she's got that level chops for sure. It's amazing you don't hear more about that. She really has such an authenticity to her in this show. You know, first of all, the iconic green army jacket, which is like a thing. Like even I knew about that before I started watching. It's like, wow. And it's so interesting to have a show partially centered around a character who, you know, when you meet her, has just started to go through. She's feeling like a lot of kids. She's feeling her way out. She's trying to form an identity. She's trying to evolve. You know, formerly she was like this uber nerd. Like she was like head nerd. She was head mathlete. All the nerds like looked up to her. She was like the smartest kid in school. And she's kind of feeling her oats. You know, she's going through the changes. She's more kind of impressed with, I guess, sort of acting out, and she wants to dress like a freak and listen to the music and hang out with those kids. And when we meet her, we don't know that Lindsay. We just know that Lindsay had existed previously. And that's really interesting because they draw out the way she was through her relationships with her parents and other characters like Millie, where we know there was this other Lindsay before. So it's a very genuine thing that a lot of us could relate to when we find the thing. We're in junior high school or high school and we're changing and we're trying to find out who we are, and we're going through that identity crisis and that's a bold thing to do as a kid. Like as adults, we don't remember that, but like walking into the lunchroom dressed as a prep one day, and then when you come in, you know, on Friday, and then when you come in Monday morning, you're dressed like a punker. That's a big deal, you know, to announce yourself as like, no, I'm this person now. And it's interesting to have the show partially set around a character who's going through that. It's really, really neat. You know, of course, she's our female protagonist. We also get the perspective of her geek younger brother, and then the group that she's coming from, and then the group that she's trying to ingratiate herself with, which is really, really, I think, a lot of fun. And, you know, I think a compelling character trying to find herself. And I did find her, the interesting thing about her is this, and I wonder why they made this decision. It seemed very realistic because you usually when you see the kid acting out, and I think a lot of this show, I think it's important to say, a lot of this show sort of flies in the face of conventionality, which was like a lot of the show goes out of its way to be unconventional, I think, and sort of defy stereotype. Usually when you have a kid acting out and becoming a freak, going from the smartest kid to acting out, you know, you would see her smoking cigarettes and drinking and doing drugs and being disrespectful to her parents. And you never see that. You see a kid, it's very sweet because you see a kid trying to find herself and trying to change and trying to have fun and sort of leave her past self behind. But when she's associating with her family at the dinner table, she's still very respectful. She's still very sweet. She may disagree with her parents, but she's not slamming the napkin down saying, this is the worst day ever, and slamming the door and throwing shit or cursing at her parents or smoking in the garage. Like you could see that she was unhappy with her past self, but she's not doing all the things we usually see in TV and movies that kids like this would be doing, you know, where it's like, you know, slamming the beer bottle down and drinking and driving and all this other kind of stuff. She still holds on to her core values and her essence. It's just that she wants to explore, you know, being a kid. And it's really sweet that the show ends on that note too, where it's like she says she's going to this, you know, convention for nerds basically, and she ends up going away in the Volkswagen bus with the hippie kids, lying to her parents, and then just, you know, zooming out. And that's how we, you know, that's almost how we end the series. So it's like, that's really interesting. She's a really interesting character because she's not conventional when you really pay attention to it. I could see what you're saying about some of the other characters are just more interesting. It's also, they give us everything about Lindsay. Like, we know everything about her dating back by the time the 18 episodes have rolled. We see pictures of her and Millie as 5-year-olds, and you know, we know what the various adventures they did growing up and birthday parties, and we know everything about her, where other characters are more compelling, like Ken, because you just get dribs and drabs of them. Right. You know, with Lindsay, you just know everything about her.
Yeah, and I mean, she's necessary. She's the Jerry Seinfeld of the show, where everything happens through her, so she's necessary, even if it wouldn't work without her. You know, and I think she is a cool character. I'm a little puzzled. See, this is one of the things about the show where when you really think about it deeply, it's like, so she was a mathlete. We see them later on in the show, with the exception of Millie, who we see often, but it's like, who else was she friendly with? Like, where are all of her other friends? Like, where she just kind of abandoned these people. And you see that when she tries to like rejoin, and some of them are mad about it, you know? And so I dig the evolution of the character, and I dig that it kind of ends on a lie, and I dig that it kind of ends with Kim Kelly, who, you know, they hated each other at the beginning. So I like the full circle stuff there. I think they did a nice job of wrapping it up. And I also dig about her trip at the end was inspired by Rosso giving her the Grateful Dead record that she didn't want to listen to. That was where it all stemmed from episodes before. So I thought that was pretty clever as well.
Her guidance counselor of all things, right?
Right, exactly.
Did you ever have a guidance counselor that cool? We haven't gotten to this character yet, but let me ask.
No.
Not even close.
No. We can talk about Rosso if you want. I mean, let's just jump right to him. I mean,
great.
Jeff Theodore Rosso, the hippie guidance counselor, as it says on Wikipedia. I love this character. I think this character's awesome. I think this character's awesome for a lot of different reasons, but to your point, Dig, to wit, I think that it's useful for us to see a character like this in our experience at Bellport. I won't say his name, but because our guidance counselor was fucking useless, and all of them were. In fact, I don't remember even talking to them, like to my guidance counselor, more than once or twice. What I remember about him is he was a big Broncos fan, and he had like Broncos posters in his office. That's like all I remember. And I remember his name. He was a nice enough man, but everyone, it was a joke, like the guidance counselor. These people don't do anything. But I liked the active nature of Rosso. It made me feel good, like that it's a story, but it makes me feel good. Like there's a dude out there that really cares about these kids, that like really tries, that stays positive, that knows he's the butt of jokes. With that's the exception of that one episode where he locks himself out of his car, which is great. And he kind of like has a breakdown, but then comes back the next day and then realizes that like he can't get his way and all of that. And we see a little bit, I would have loved to have seen a little bit more about him too. We do find out that he's like, you know, a rock singer and stuff, but
yeah.
And a musician. But I really dig this character because I feel like it's a fantasy for me to have someone that I could have related to like this. And yet I didn't. So it's very foreign to me. So I kind of fantasize like, wow, how much better off would I have been at Bellport if we had anyone who gave a shit about us at all, especially someone like this. So I'm wondering what you thought about Jeffrey Theodore Rosso.
Really great character. Super great performance by Dave Allen. And you know what? It would have been so easy in a show like this to do like the contrived, like clueless guidance counselor, you know, but like this was a guy who had texture. You know, he was a mainstay. He really genuinely, he's a little bit of an oddball. He's a little bit inappropriate at times, but he doesn't even know he's being inappropriate. He has a genuine care for the kids. He really cares about them. And it was a little bit of a fantasy because the extent of my guidance counselor experience in high school was going in on like a career. There was like a couple of weeks where you had to establish this. I think I was a junior. You had to establish this career trajectory and write all this stuff out. And then ultimately you were going to sit down with the guidance counselor and you were going to discuss like a battle plan. Like, okay, you've been doing your research. Here's what you presented. We're going to sit down, find out what the future moves are going to be. Where are you going to go to school? What are you thinking about as a post-high school plan? So on and so forth. So I did all this stuff. And of course, I did probably by the time I was in 10th grade, I had my sights set to the point of like even going out for like plays and dramas and trying out for stuff because I found out about the whole acting arc with animators. I was pretty serious about it. And I went in and told them, you know, oh, you're an artist and you like to write, blah, blah, you're an AP English, blah, blah. They look at the thing and they just give a cursory glance and just try to lump you in, you know.
Right.
That was my whole experience. And it was like, what do you want to be? And I was like, I want to be an animator. I'm really interested in animation and cartooning, and telling him about Disney. I think I was telling him about Draw Magazine or Toon Magazine at that time, like really into this. I'm reading articles about certain studios and animators and artists and stuff like that. And they were like, oh, all right. So they had their little career printout thing, and they were like, oh, you want to be a graphic designer? And I was like, no, I want to be an animator. And they were like, oh, it's like an architect. Like, this was the conversation I was having. I like, they were just going in alphabetical order. Like, I just said animator. What did I say that meant architect in that sentence? Like, that was my experience. I felt like I was talking to a 4-year-old. I mean, really. And to see a character like this, it's like, wow. And he's a little bit kooky. He's a little bit corny, but I love getting all that texture. Like, he's this like bitching rock musician. He's got this sort of rebellious past. He's like a Berkeley left-wing activist, was really involved in all that kind of stuff when he was a kid. And you learn all about him and the character building stuff. But really, it transcends politics, and it transcends bullies and freaks and geeks and jocks. Like, you see him administering that sort of TLC to everybody. He really, even though he's this cornball, and the kids look at him that way, he's kind of the butt of their jokes, he really cares for them. And I think it's, he brings a little bit of a comedy, but he also brings a little bit of that sweetness where it's like, wow, this character is actually really memorable because it's not that, stereotypical, clueless, apathetic guidance counselor.
Yeah, which was my experience. I don't know that I even ever had those. I mean, maybe I did, but I don't remember having any conversation about the future with anyone.
Brutal. It was absolutely brutal. I could see a lot of kids walking out of there. Like, let's say it's a typical high school junior. They don't know what they want to do yet. I mean, a lot of people go into college undeclared, right? They don't know. They spend the first couple of years of even college kind of going through the druthers of what they want to do, or what they want their future to be like. So think about a prototypical high school junior walking into a guidance counselor office. So you could send a kid out of there even more confused. I was lucky enough to know what I wanted to do. So, it's just like, and I still hear stories, I won't say from who, but about guidance counselors in school. And it's just like, I can't believe, like, these people, when you think about the effect a teacher has, what's the difference? Like, a guidance counselor should be bringing that as well. That's their whole point. That's the whole point of them being there. So this character was, like a lot of characters in this show, you get that sort of, and I wonder if it's like, if this is an autobiographical character, like, did one of these guys, the writers or Judd or Paul, like, did they have somebody like this in their lives? Because, certainly if you're growing up like a Daniel Desario, be helpful to have somebody like this in your life. You're not getting it at home. Certainly.
And I often think about, which I was just thinking about this as you were speaking with guidance counselors today. Got to give them a little bit of credit today because they probably hear some pretty outlandish shit now. Like, I was reading, there was like some polling saying like more than half of kids, like, they aspire to be a Twitch streamer, a YouTuber, or a podcaster. And it's like, that's first of all, bad news. Second of all, dissuade them of that immediately. I don't want any competitors. Second of all, is like, you walk in and you say that, and it probably is very similar to your animation spiel back in 1990, so I don't know. We'll see how that all works. Well, maybe we have some guidance counselors that can write into us or have people have some stories.
That's a great point, though. I like that. They probably do hear that quite a bit.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it goes both ways, but I generally feel like that's not a really worthwhile, useful role at all. I don't think kids know what a guidance counselor is even supposed to do. I don't think. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just speaking out of turn here, but I want to return to the Weir family. Yes, you had brought up Harold Weir, and so let's talk about him, the dad, the patriarch. Joe Goddard wrote to us on Patreon and said, "Hey boys, maybe my favorite character in the entire show is Harold Weir. He just cracks me up every time. He's just such the stereotypical dad that doesn't really understand his kids, but is still trying his best anyway. One of my favorite episodes is when Nick crashes at the Weir's house for a bit, and we get to see the difference between Harold and Nick's father. Just great stuff. I love the scene where Lindsay is complaining that she knows what it's like to have a strict dad, and Harold just straight up says, trust me, you don't. Chills every time, such a great character, and maybe my favorite TV dad besides Frank Costanza. He will always be number one. Love the show and love your show. Keep on keeping on. Thank you, Joe, for writing in. So I feel like Harold Weir's character is interesting because that character changes a little bit too. In fact, I remember the commercials running for this show, teasing it with the stuff where he's like, you know, what happened to Janis Joplin? She's dead. You know, that kind of like shit. And you realize that after like the second or third episode, they stopped doing that.
Yes.
Because it's dumb.
Yeah.
And there's way more texture to this. Like you could tell that like some writer, some character they knew a dad like this, or that was always, but it became too much. And I was so happy about that because what we ended up finding was a man who loves his family, loves his wife. He's kind, but he's a little detached. He's a little concerned. He's a little traditional, but I dig him. And I feel like there's a lot of warmth actually with that character and a nice balance. Again, going back to the Arnold family with the Wonder Years, very different than the dad in that show. The dad he's talking about to Lindsay is Kevin Arnold's dad. And I do love that scene as well. I wrote that in my notes because that scene stuck with me as well, specifically with Nick's father, who's in the Air Force. And you got a little bit of patina now of Mr. Weir's past, who clearly had a dad like this, which is why he's sympathetic to Nick. So what do you think of this character?
Oh, dude. So, I mean, shouts out, right, to Joe Flaherty. Really brings it in this character. And it's true. They really started off with that sort of cartoony, Homer Simpson-esque, clueless dad. You know, think of shades of like Married with Children. It's like, oh, this is the blowhard, like shitty, you know, maybe racist, definitely overly traditional, sexist dad. And then they realized, like, let's give this guy a little bit of texture. He was always funny. I always liked his very specific 1980 look and feel. Like he just felt like a prototypical dad would feel like in the 80s. And, you know, the way he acts towards his wife, like I bring home the bacon, I don't clear the table, like I don't do the dishes, that type of thing. I think it's okay to do that kind of stuff, to give characters those sort of foibles and those faults and stuff like that. But when they started to give him texture, and I think it really was in that Nick episode, where you realize like where his whole attitude is coming from, where it's like, I grew up with a dad that was hard. And it's meaningful when you have a 1980s dad sort of break that chain, right? Like he's not bringing and nobody taught him that. He just felt like, I don't want my kids to grow up like I grew up. And to do that, you know what I mean? To break that cycle, you know, similar to what our dad did with his dad. And I think our dad had to learn through various tragedies. But in order to be able to do that without the present day therapy and the touchy-feely stuff that goes on today, which is nothing wrong with that. But a 1980s dad typically wouldn't be coming from that background. He would be doing it himself. He would be breaking that cycle himself. So it's really kind of neat, you know, where he's like, you know, Nick's talking to him about his passion for music. And he's like, that's not Neil Peart's not a drummer. And then he introduces him to the
Buddy
Rich and Krupa records,
right.
You know, and starts playing like the traditional drummers that he grew up with. And just, you know, going from a dad who you think, okay, this dad's going to be the vehicle for, like, he's going to be an obstacle for Lindsay. He's going to be an obstacle for the mom. He's kind of going to bring those traditional values when they're trying to evolve. The mom's trying to find her identity. Lindsay's trying to do her thing. But then he goes into he turns into this empathetic dude. And that was really, really neat. And again, that speaks to the show's trajectory. I think, again, they really were feeling it out. You know, like, what can we do here? What's working? What's not working? As they went along, and they weren't afraid to change it. And it does make it feel touch and go, but it shows a boldness too in order to like steer it. Like, okay, it's going in this direction. It's not really working, or it's hackneyed. Let's see where we could take this. And this character really, really speaks to that method.
I dig the character too. And I'm glad that you brought up just the evolutionary nature of breaking the chain and how it would probably happen around this time, you know, or at least in this generation, the baby boomers grew up pretty hard, and yeah, with parents that fought the Nazis and fought the Japanese and lived through the Depression and also went to Korea and other stuff like that. So, and then also watched a similar chain happen where the younger baby boomers sent their kids to Vietnam.
Yes.
And I think that was a wake-up call to everyone. Remember, the movie begins 5 years after Vietnam ends, so then they reference it several times. Like,
they do.
There's like a noise thing where they say something like, you know, it's not the last chopper out of Saigon, or something, which is an awesome joke, but pretty obscure to that time. I mean, no one's going to understand what that means today. So I dig that. And I especially like Dagan, and we'll talk about her now. Becky Ann Baker's performance as Jean, and we had brought her up, the wife, the mom, she still acts today. In fact, I was reading about her a little bit. That HBO series Girls, she was nominated for an Emmy for that. So she's still bouncing around as opposed rather to Joe Flaherty, who actually doesn't act and hasn't acted in like 15 or 16 years.
That's amazing. He's so good.
I think actually Freaks and Geeks was one of his last roles.
Wow.
So I really dig, I mean, you brought up the warmth. In fact, I feel like she's a little bit like our mom. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the way kind of I interpreted her. She's soft-spoken, kind, patient. We see kind of her sadness at times. It reminds me of some situations I've been in and witnessed with mom in the past, specifically on the Halloween episode. But then I just love her soft-spokenness, her even delivery, her patience, her curiosity. She wants to be involved in her kids' lives. Like, for instance, the whole diary thing with Lindsay and all of that, but she's a little scared of it. And she wants to give her daughter good advice, but the advice ends up being really bad. She ends up blowing up, Lindsay's spot with Nick and all that.
I forgot about that.
But I really dig this character, and I feel like even though she's not really in it very much, and she doesn't have very many lines, we often just see her in the kitchen or at the table. I just always, I don't know. There was something you almost want to like hug her.
Yeah.
You almost want to be like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, she really is. And the Weir family is the first family we meet. That was another thing, like how they evolved and how they did a trajectory with meeting the families was very interesting. A little frustrating because we don't meet a lot of the families until much later. We meet the Weirs. I think we meet Nick Andopoulos' father. And then the next family we meet are Kelly's, right? I think.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yes. I think you're right.
So,
yeah.
We don't even meet Neil and Bill's families until later. So we're really hanging on to the Weirs, and they're really establishing the tone of the show early on. And I was very confused by the mom character at first because it wasn't what I was expecting. Again, it felt very realistic, and it took me a little while to come around to it. And then I realized, she just feels like a real mom of that, indicative of that era. Sometimes doting, sometimes a little clueless, seemingly, but, a big booster for her kids. Very traditional housewife, cooks the lovely meal every night, has the husband who we find out, sort of expects her to perform in that role. And she seems happy to do it, though. She seems like, besides her little arc of like feeling like she's unappreciated by the husband, which is a blip, but also kind of gave a little texture to her too. Like she's human. She feels she's not just a robot here to serve the family, which was really interesting.
She's like trying that scene where she's cooking all the new food and she cooks them like game hen or something. It's kind of sad.
He starts dancing with it.
Yeah, it's kind of sad, and that's one of the awkward moments you're talking about where it's like, wow, this is kind of sad.
Yeah,
and then he's like, I'm gonna go get a sandwich, or what? And it's like,
holy shit,
wow, man, like
super uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And
but they let it linger. It's good. They let it linger.
They let it linger, and it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to watch, and again, letting those awkward moments plays out just feels so realistic. But she was, even when she seems to always side with the dad and with Harold, and even when she sort of vocalizes an opposing or dissenting opinion from Harold, she kind of does it respectfully. It really, they're a team. And, you could see Lindsay and Sam have this great upbringing with the parents, but they're both sort of very kind of set in their traditional roles. And, she just feels they didn't give the character, whether it was Becky Ann Baker or the powers that be running the show, like didn't sort of imbue her character with any sort of quirkiness. She didn't have a thing. She was just the mom. And we know moms like that. And I agree with you. Our mom has a little more personality than this character, obviously. She has more humor and stuff. But there are shades of mom in this character. And it might be the sweetness. It might be the empathy and sort of the constant championing for your kids and, tireless energy you put into raising them and stuff like that. But she's great. I mean, she's again, like just grounds the show with her performance, which is a non-performance. It's just very real.
Yeah, she's just there, like almost like set dressing, but necessary to the home component for the Weirs. And we haven't talked about, Sam yet, so we should talk about him, played by John Francis Daly, who obviously later went on to be famous in that show. I never really watched it, but the popular criminal show Bones, which he was on for like ever.
Long time, right?
Yeah. But he plays Sam, and Sam is Lindsay's little brother. And if Lindsay's our view into the so-called freaks, then Sam is our view into the so-called geeks. And this character is cute too, although I think similar to Lindsay, he's the proxy by which we learn about more interesting characters. I feel like John Francis Daly maybe gives one of the weakest performances in the show. I feel like he's a little whiny, and I don't feel like anyone really talks like that. You know, I feel like it's a little awkward and like a little, like you could tell, like it's like, you know, fumble over your words and stumble around when you're talking to, you know, hot girl, but it's like it doesn't come off great. I mean, he's young. Kid actors have a hard time. So what did you think about Sam's character? I mean, I find the nerdy stuff, you know, he's got his Battlestar Galactica stuff. All their references are great. I love that. And I want to talk to you about that a little bit later, but talk to me a little bit about Sam.
You know, it occurs to me as you're talking, he really is, besides Lindsay, which I think you could kind of hook into, he really is the audience surrogate character. They really don't try to make him too anything. He's not too into sci-fi. He's not too into girls. He's not too into comedy and, you know, that sort of thing like Neil is. He's sort of a balanced dude. He's our protagonist, you know, in many ways. And he's the one to bring us through the story. So it's like they don't give him too much shades of anything, which is really interesting. I'm the same as you. I'm not really sold on John Francis Daly performance all the time. I think it's weird. You know, sometimes he just does that awkward laugh, but then I realize like he feels awkward. He feels like a proper 14 or 15-year-old kid would feel going through the things he's going through growing up. So maybe it works in that regard. What I really loved about the main three as an overarching thing was that, you know, you have your three heroes, and I love the dynamic that they could sort of write in between three best friends. I thought that was really, really cool. It really brings out their personality, their various personalities and their interrelationships. I think it might even be really cool to try that with four main friends. I mean, you think about things like Stand By Me and stuff, but an episodic series that could be done over multiple seasons. The four friend thing might even be cooler. Of course, the Wonder Years did it with Kevin and Winnie and Paul, but this even more so. So you see the interplay between the three of them, which I think is really cool. And, you know, Sam's part of that. They all, each one of them, as we talk about them, will articulate it better, but they all have their own personalities. But they're all, it's cool that they're three best friends because they all are a little, even though they fall into this geek, they fall into the margins of geek. They're all different from each other. And that speaks to authentic friendships. You know, I think of the kids that I grew up with that I was friends with. We were different in many ways, but you have those common things, you have those things in common, or those things that that just makes you sometimes that are, you know, not the most easy things to articulate that make you friends. And I think these three have that. And I think that's why the Sam character works.
Yeah, he's interesting because, well, the first thing that's interesting about this is that John Francis Daly is actually younger than I am. So he was of the right age to play that character, as opposed to, I mean, you don't really see it, but Linda Cardellini's 25.
That's amazing.
You know, so it's very 90210 like with what they were doing here.
But do you buy her like as Linda a 16-year-old really cute?
What'd you say?
Do you buy her as a 16-year-old though in the show, 17-year-old?
I do.
Yeah, I do too.
I mean, I definitely do, but it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, you know, is it creepy to be like, Linda Cardellini's really cute in this? And then you like look at her, oh, she's literally 25 years old in the show. Okay.
It's okay.
So yeah, I like Sam's character, but again, he's necessary to kind of get a little bit of a taste for everything. And he kind of frustrates the audience. I feel like it's kind of, he might be designed to do that. He's really hung up on this kind of lame girl.
Yeah.
Someone said this to me recently because I'd been listening to, I love Pink Floyd as everyone knows, but I was listening to Time recently, which is a great song, and I never really understood it, what it meant until recently. It's like one of those songs where you can listen to it over and over and over again and you really do not get it until you listen to it and you realize what it's saying. And someone had responded to me on Twitter saying, you know, the old saying, what is it? Youth is wasted on the young or whatever.
Yes. Yep.
And you kind of see that with Weir, where it's like you're making all the wrong moves. You almost want to like move them around the chessboard a little bit. And so that was like kind of an interesting experience for me watching him where it's like, oh man, this girl sucks. Like, you know, just learn a little bit better. Don't listen to your horny friends and all this kind of stuff. They don't know anything either. And I was talking about that with Micah recently where I'm like, you know, you even see like young couples out, right? You know, young guy, young girl in their 20s, you know, their early 20s or in their college or whatever. And like, you guys have no idea what you're doing. What a waste, both of your time.
It's true though. And Sam is that guy. He's sort of the weak-minded one. He's the easily led one of the three, I would say. He has the least conviction in who he is. He's still... Definitely. Which I think I could certainly relate to that at that age. Before I found skateboarding, I didn't really have something to hook into, you know, so he doesn't, you know, he hasn't discovered the skateboard yet, Sam.
Well, even when he goes and dates Cindy Sanders, finally, he goes and sits with them at the cool kids and the jocks or whatever at their table, and the other guys are left behind at the other table, and it's like, well, why wouldn't you try to ingratiate your friends? So he always seemed like a little bit of a mercenary to me, but like it's so interesting that they were going to bring, you know, what were you saying? We're going to make Bill into like a basketball player or a football player or whatever.
Write that in. Yeah.
And you would expect that he would be like the least likely person for that to happen. It would be more like someone like Sam that would want to be the chameleon. But since we had brought up Sam, we should bring up the other characters as well. Let's talk about Sam Levine as Neil Schreiber. So as far as Neil is concerned, I feel like he's the most interesting of the three characters, the three geek characters, because he encapsulate, like, he's a little bit wise beyond his years. You can understand him a little bit better. And he knows what he wants. He wants girls. He wants to laugh. He wants to have fun. And he's treated really well at home. He comes from affluence. And that's the other interesting thing about the three kids is that you have pretty affluent kid. You have in Neil, in Sam, you have probably upper middle class kid. And then you have probably pretty working class with Bill. It actually appears that they might even live in an apartment, Bill, which is nothing wrong with that, but just to show you the different strata that these kids, and they all, you know, love each other and have a lot of affection for each other. But, you know, I really connected. You had brought up the Neil Schreiber going around with the garage door opener. Dude. It's really probably one of the most memorable things in the show, and how his friends want to keep riding with him and they promise they'll be with him and he just can't stop going around. And he's one of those kids he has a really warm home life. His dad is really cool. He's a doctor or dentist. But then the guy, you know, then he's kind of caught cheating, and you see more. I would have loved to see Bill have more of an arc in addition to Neil's, where you learn a little bit more about where he comes from and why. And, you know, he comes from a kind of a broken home as opposed to Neil. But we discovered that Neil's home is on the verge of being broken. Yeah. And I feel like that's one of the deeper things in the show. There's a lot of deep stuff in here, domestic violence and abuse and classism and all that. And we get into all of that in the show, and we'll talk more about that. But I feel like his particular angle introduces infidelity, and the scene where Neil is crying to his mom and says he doesn't want to ruin her life is like one of the most poignant scenes in the show, because imagine a child. First of all, imagine Sam knowing that. Then Bill blows up his spot, and then they don't believe him, and then they try to act like nothing happens, and then he finds the evidence that compels him to the point where he kind of loses it, and he finds out his older brother knew, and all this kind of stuff. And it sounds like his dad's a philanderer, like not just having an affair. I don't know what's worse, really, but yeah. Like I don't know what's worse, like sleeping around with multiple women when you're married or having one woman. I actually think it might be worse to have one woman, because that's like, you know, like when you find out like, oh, this other person had another family for 25 years. I mean, that kind of shit happens, which is crazy. Dude. But what did you think about Neil Schreiber?
I love this character. I think I've really come to love Sam Levine. I watch a podcast called Kevin Pollak's Chat Show, where Kevin Pollak has various celebrities on, and Sam Levine co-chairs that podcast, interviewing the people that come on, whether it's Christopher Guest or whoever, Ben Stiller. They have great episodes centered around great performers, and they talk for a few hours. I just watched one with Jon Favreau the other day. Sam Levine's just very likable in real life. He's great. I'm surprised he's not in more things. Of course, we know him from things like Inglourious Bastards too. But I just want to give a shout out to him. I really like him. I would like to see him do more. But this is a great character. Again, like a character that really has no analog. You know, this old soul. He's definitely the wealthiest of his three friends, but you know, sort of this young, budding Jewish comedian. Like he has like an interest in magic and performing. He has a ventriloquist dummy, a figure, as he calls it. And, you know, you could see him like, he's an interesting character because he's like, his interest is like comedians and shtick. Like it's really funny. Like that's his fascination. He's not into collecting baseball cards or sci-fi. Like that's his thing, which is really neat and funny and makes the character feel really original. And he's an interesting one of the three because he really solidly maintains that he isn't a nerd. He's the geek who doesn't know he's a geek. He's very comfortable in his skin, the way he dresses. He has a lot of conviction in himself. He believes in himself. And even when he is being a nerd, he really, you know, refuses to admit that. He thinks he's just doing his thing. You know, he's the would-be ladies man. And, you know, I could see like a Neil, you know, accelerated 5 or 6 years after the show, after high school. You know, he's going to be the one like performing up in the Borscht Belt, you know, performing his comedy, performing his shtick up there. Like that's going to be Neil, you know. I really got to love the character and that garage door episode, dude. I mean, the divorce arc is interesting. It's one of my main sort of, one of the main reasons I would have liked to see the show go on because they were going to, you know, the parents were going to get divorced and then Neil would be dealing with that, you know, his parents being in two separate homes and the tragedy of that, even though the mom announces that she really doesn't want that to happen until he leaves the house like his older brother. But I mean, divorce is so devastating for a kid this age, you know, and especially when there's unfaithfulness involved with cheating and mistresses and all that kind of stuff. And I love the desperation of Neil's character just feeling like, what really could a 15-year-old do in that position? So he's going to drive around on his bike through all the neighborhoods and just use that garage door clicker that he finds to find out who his dad's cheating with. Now, what is it going to accomplish? Nothing, but it's just that utter sense of desperation that he had to do something. It's very sweet. The way it's filmed, the way his friends are with him on the mission and trying to talk him out of it. Like, dude, this is, you know, what is this going to accomplish type thing? Let's just go home type thing. But he has the conviction that he has to do it. And he does find the house, which is crazy. Such a sweet thing. And apparently one of the producers, is it Jeff Judah, I think? Let me look real quick. Yeah, Jeff Judah, this really happened to him. This was a real thing that happened. And he found the garage door clicker in his dad's Stingray. And he went around the neighborhood trying to find who it belonged to. And just like, really, that was probably the first arc where I was like, wow, like this show is bringing something that I've never seen in another show before. Like that was just real. That's writing. That's Emmy worthy writing right there.
And that's why I wanted them to linger, you know, like this is what I was talking about. It's like, don't shake up the bauble, you know, like let it rest so that we see how it all falls apart from here, or how it all just not necessarily falls apart, but lays out. I feel like that was such a powerful thing, a powerful sequence of events that we didn't really get to explore in the perspective of the friends. Like, you saw this, you were going to keep it from me. You told our other friend, who then told me. We didn't believe you. Then we found it's a lot of depth there. You can write a whole season just on that arc. And I feel like I felt bad for Neil because he looked up to his dad so much more than the other guys. Obviously, Bill doesn't have a father in his life. And Sam doesn't realize how good he's got it with his dad. So it's the dad that gives them ice cream and soda and watches SNL with them. And it's cool. I mean, like,
he's the cool dad.
I like how they introduced, and I like how they introduce him like that. Like, because you find out how hard that fall is later. And I wrote this down in my notes as you were talking because I didn't want to forget this to bring it up. It almost brings a humanity out, not for the kids, but for the parents, because we realize that these things really happen. And in fact, one of the really poignant scenes is when Dr. Schreiber and Sam are in the office. Oof. And he's kind of like telling the kid, like, I want to know what else is out there. Like, you can tell that he has no one to talk to.
Yeah.
And he obviously is scared that Sam's going to fuck things up.
Yeah.
But he's also like kind of just opining. Like, you ever wonder what else? He says something like, you ever wonder what else is out there and all that. And he's unhappy. Yeah. He doesn't want to be in this relationship and he's trying to do right. And it's almost like, wow, like this isn't the right way to handle it, but okay. Like, you are a man, you have a life. You're not happy. You're trying to do the right thing, but you're not. And So I would have loved to have just seen more of that as well, because that was another one of those really interesting scenes for me.
Oh, dude, it was so good. You're putting Sam in that, putting a 15-year-old in that position. It's a little insidious. You know, it's coming out of a place of desperation for him because he doesn't want to break up his family, and he knows Sam knows something. But the way he's fishing and, you know, he's doing it while he's supposed to be performing his job. And it's just like what you said earlier, too, about Sam and Bill sort of carrying the weight of this knowledge, you know, bearing this weight of, you know, a 15-year-old on their shoulders would be terrible. And then handing that off to Neil, and then Neil carrying the weight for his mom. It's like, what, you know, thinking like, if she finds this out, it's going to devastate my family. It's going to break everything I know apart. And then finding out, you know, the big brother knows.
And he says that to him too. The brother says, like, what do you want? You want to like fuck it all up.
Right.
You know, and it's an interesting point, so you know, like, oh, maybe you don't, you know?
Right.
Who's your loyalty to? Yourself, or your situation, or your mother, or your father? So I really dug the depth of that particular arc.
It was really good.
And I'm glad that they introduced it, even though we got it a little late. Definitely
came late, yeah.
What would you, I just out of curiosity, like, how would you feel if you found out that mom or dad had like an affair, you know, like even now, like it's interesting. It's because it's not really your business, you know, but maybe it's a little more your business when you're in the house as opposed to when you're an adult. Like if, for instance, if like dad or mom were like philandering now, it's like, I don't know. Like,
that's a good point. That's a really good point. Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like so tragic and so unthinkable. You can't even really relate to it. As a 15-year-old, you would think like, okay, this thing is going to destroy everything I know. It's going to destroy my home life. So there's probably a lot of selfish reasons, rightly so, as a young kid saying like, this is going to break my world asunder. My parents aren't going to live together. It's going to change the whole rhythm of my household. I might have to move. Like I might have to go to a new school. Like it's a huge shit. It could be a huge devastating shift for a kid.
Definitely.
It's really interesting to think about like if mom and dad were still together and that, let's say something like this happened 10 or 12 years after you move out. You went to college, you're already established, maybe you're married, you're a homeowner, you moved away. And then how would it affect? But I would say like, I think about it from Helene's perspective, for instance, as somebody in her mid-40s, her parents are still together. What would be devastating about her parents splitting up now would be how it would affect the grandkids. So it's always going to be something. It's like grandma and grandpa aren't together anymore. So that would also be like devastating later on in life as a parent. You know, for your kids, you would probably be thinking mostly about your kids at that point. Like, you know, and that must be, I'm sure people go through that, but you know, that's always seems tragic to me, especially when people get this far, like people like the Schweibers who have a kid in college, like they've gone 20 something years and still can't find a way to hold it together. It's like all that time sort of in the can, all that time spent forming something, building something, strengthening something. And then after, you know, who knows, 30 years, maybe they were together 10 years before they got married. So let's say 30 years that would fall apart is it seems so tragic to me. It seems more, and this might be wrong-headed to say this, but it seems so much more tragic than somebody who's married for 5 years, you know, because you have all that time invested.
Sure.
And all that work invested, you know.
I agree. The only other character we haven't talked about in the Geeks realm is brought up many times, Bill Haverchuck, played by Martin Starr. So this character is super interesting. I find him so endearing because I think he's more himself than anyone in the show, and he's unabashedly himself. Yes. I feel like underneath this aesthetic, this bumbling, awkward aesthetic, is a smart, wily operator, and I just dig this performance. I feel like he's a little over the top sometimes, but I also love how he wears his nerdiness on his sleeve more than anyone too. Like when he has that when his mom's dating one of his teachers, and we'll talk about that teacher in a moment, but he's watching Dallas and he brings up Dallas constantly, and Three's Company comes up and Battlestar and all these kinds of things, but that how passionate he is with it. And because he grew up with a single mom, it's kind of similar to me growing up with so much influence from Dana and Allie, I think, where you kind of become a little feminine, not in a bad way, but I think I have more feminine, what's the best way to put it? A more feminine slant, let's say, than a man who grew up amongst men. That's right. And so for me, it's like, yeah, of course I like Downton Abbey. You know, of course I like, of course I watch Party of Five. What? I've seen every episode of 90210. But that was because of the influence I had from women, right? Just with entertainment and in other ways. And I feel like Bill lives in that life. Like his mom and him watch Dallas, for instance. And so we don't learn much about him. Actually, there's a really sad thing where they're making fun of him not having a dad or something in one of the early episodes. And he's like, I just talked to my dad a few months ago or something like that. So he's around, but he's growing up with a single mom, doing the best she can, obviously. And he's coming up pretty solidly, it sounds like, or it seems like. So what's your take on Bill Haverchuck? He's
my favorite of the three. I find him just the most likable. I find him the most appealing of the three best friends. Like you said, he's the genuine article. He's a unapologetic dork. Seems very comfortable in his skin. And in a way different than Neil. Neil seems like he's a little more like he's explored creating an identity for himself. He wears the sweater with the collared shirt underneath, and he knows who he wants to model himself after. He wants to model himself after certain comedians, and we know what his interests are, but it sort of seems more contrived, like he's put work into his identity, where it seems like Bill is just, he's just comfortable in his skin, and you naturally root for this character. Like you said, he has sort of a more universal sensitivity, and that's really interesting. Underneath that sort of dorky exterior, geeky exterior with the big glasses and the goofy laugh and everything, he does seem to have some sort of wisdom, and it might be like a certain brand of wisdom, and it might be from that, being raised by a single mom and not really having the father figure. And he's a little bit of a mystery too in the beginning, because we don't know anything about his home life until much later. He's the last of the main three who we get to know. The mom was sort of a hardworking waitress, single mom. She's not drawing a lot of money, a lot of income. She was a one-time exotic dancer, we know. So, and that's another thing where it's like kind of uncomfortable to be a 14, 15-year-old and people have not, maybe your closest friends only know it, but people in your life know what your mom used to do and stuff, and sort of the awkwardness associated with that. So you kind of feel for him a little bit. But we find out the mom's cool. She's not, she's doing the best she can. But it's interesting that she's raising such a promising young man, at least from the personality side. He's a good kid. He really cares about his friends. He has a genuine empathy for his friends, especially his two best friends. And yeah, I found him very, very appealing. I found him I think Martin Starr did a great job with the character. I think he's a lot of fun. He has that goofy sort of Revenge of the Nerds exterior that's a lot of fun, but there's a lot more fabric to him, beyond that nerdy outside, that nerdy shell.
And to his canny operator kind of status, like even him, calling the gym teacher to get them better picks during baseball and all that, like he knows what he's doing. I think he's a really interesting, nice way to round out the geeks. But we've not spent too much time with the freaks yet, apart from Lindsay. So let's jump into them, that group. Start with Daniel Desario, played by the very famous James Franco. So this is one of the deeper characters in the show, I think, as well. We find out that he's left behind twice. Or left back twice. And I think we find out that his father's like basically incapacitated as well. Yeah. So he comes from a pretty rough background, and he's definitely a user and an abuser of people. I mean, he's definitely not a good guy, but what I feel like you see the most evolution out of him in the entire show out of any character from beginning to end. And it's not just because he joins AV Club with a gun to his head and plays D&D with the guys and stuff. It's because he does, like, he's more sophisticated, more complex than let on. And I think he's probably the person I would have been most interested to see what happened to. But I dig James Franco. I think he does a really wonderful job in this. And Daniel's character is a linchpin to the show.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, James Franco's so charismatic. I mean, he has the acting chops. He just has a little bit of that eccentricity that he brings to a role, that brand that only he could bring. And again, we talked about, sort of those James Dean-esque qualities that they knew they got in him, and, sort of got their meat hooks into him before they found, they were really felt like they had to get him on board before, he found out who he was, which is really an interesting thing to hear, that he didn't acknowledge it, although I'm sure he was looking at Brando and James Dean and modeling him, De Niro, and modeling himself after those guys, his the people, the actors that he aspired to. And what I love about this character that I realized eventually, besides those exterior James Dean qualities that Franco obviously has, and I love him in almost everything, But, here you have this burnout and this slacker, sort of the leader of our freaks in the show. But his sort of perpetual low performance and everybody's low expectations of him too sort of bum him out. He beneath the surface, he knows he's this underachiever, or maybe he hasn't developed the tools yet to find out what he wants to do or aspire to something or, try to do better in school, but it bothers him. We find out that those things really bother him. But it's interesting that he doesn't take the energy that he's putting into maybe manipulating or having fun or copying drugs to sort of embrace school or get better grades or not cut class. And it's interesting, like I could really speak to that. There's a little bit of that in me where, especially in high school, where I was just like, I know I could be like in the top 25 of my class, but I'm not going to do it because it's boring. It bores me, that type of thing, where I wasn't crossing over into drugs and bad behavior. I also had a much better home background than Daniel did. But, that we know a lot of people like this who have the potential, but for some reason just can't, don't have the tools or don't have the tools to embrace it yet. And you get that in the character. And I think that makes him a little tragic. And I think that makes him a little sympathetic. Like you said, we know from the trappings of his life that we see briefly, like his home and his yard and stuff, that he comes from a low income background where the dad's obviously, incapacitated in some way and the mom's taking care of him and there's prescription drugs involved and maybe painkillers and all that kind of stuff. And you could see, like, when you come from that background, it's easy to get wrapped up in the sort of lifestyle that Daniel leads. But there's more. What makes it tragic is there's more to him. And that's another lament for me with the series. Had it gone on, how would they evolved this character, especially knowing the boldness of the people, the creators, that they were willing to take turns and make characters evolve and change things and all that kind of stuff. I think they were talking about doing that with Millie too, where they were like, we're going to make Millie, we haven't talked about yet, but we're going to make Millie into a freak too. Like, we're going to make her have that character have this turn. And it feels very realistic because, listen, if we all sat down with an elementary school yearbook and a high school yearbook and singled out a couple of characters that we grew up with, we could see, you would see, oh, little Melissa was so sweet. By the time she was a sophomore in high school, she was like the biggest headbanger of all. She had the mohawk and she had the Iron Maiden patch on her denim jacket. And like, so people really evolved. There's a truth to that. There's an authenticity to that. And I love that the show might have done that with Daniel. We definitely see that. Like, was he just kind-hearted enough to embrace the nerds and not really care about what the perception was going to be socially in high school? We know he got left back a couple of times.
Yeah.
So is he one of those guys that just has the heart to transcend that? And that's kind of an appealing character. We would all love to meet somebody like that in high school. I certainly didn't have that sort of, I wasn't that evolved yet. I wasn't that sophisticated to be like, not care, that I was seen with certain people and stuff like that. But he's a great character, man. He's really, I would have loved to seen what they did with this guy, with Daniel, had that, even another season or two, you could have got a lot of great stuff out of this.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the thing I love about Daniel's character is that he is what he is. And yet, I mean, I'd have to go back and watch it again. I'm not going to do it just for this, but he doesn't really seem to judge anyone or make fun of anyone. It's why when he joins AV and then ends up playing D&D with the guys at the end, which again is one of my favorite things in the show, like that whole evolution and how he becomes like a D&D nerd, D&D version 1, by the way, is that it's believable. He seems totally amenable to whatever. And unlike his girlfriend or unlike, Ken or others, it's like he isn't trying to get a laugh. He's not trying to be a dickhead. It doesn't seem like that. He really is just trying to wind his way through the system and do as little work as possible. Although I will say that one of the most interesting scenes is when he is caught cheating on the algebra test and he's in shop with Lindsay waiting to be called into the office, and he has this breakdown, right? And gives this spiel about how he was told how stupid he was when he was a kid and he was on third track and stuff. And then he comes and does the same speech as he's like lying about cheating. And you realize that he's a little sociopathic too. Like, or if not, maybe not sociopathic. Maybe that's a misnomer, but he's done this before.
An opportunist.
And he has no problem manipulating Lindsay or others. And he did. And that's why she starts breaking out laughing, which I love that response. And they think it's a nervous response, but she realizes in the moment, like, wow, this guy just totally used me and worked me.
It's a great point, dude. I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
So he is manipulative. And, in the beginning, the first couple episodes, you think that Lindsay and Daniel are going to get romantically involved before the whole thing kicks off with Nick. So it seems to be going in that direction. It's like, uh-oh, like she's in trouble. This guy's like, a couple of paces ahead. She's really smart academically, but Daniel's he's a smooth operator, dude. So, and, he comes from that background of, being, he had to be an opportunist, probably to survive in his family. So it's a great point. I'm so glad you brought up the thing with them getting punished for cheating on that math test, because that was an important thing to bring out the personalities, where she's trying to throw himself on the rails for him. And you think that he's going to take one for the team, or he's going to kind of step and take a bullet for her, but he doesn't. And that's telling, and it humanizes him too. Like, they're not trying to make it's like, it's not this this beast, that's really the knight in shining armor underneath. Like, he does have some qualities that are unsavory.
Yeah, I think his whole MO is simply like, I'm going to live and do what I want to do, and I'm not out to hurt anyone, but I will hurt you if it means that I won't get hurt, and that's kind of how he operates. So. Yeah. Let's talk. We brought up Nick several times. Nick Andopoulos, played by Jason Segel, and his character is a huge pothead. And he's a musician, drummer, has a pretty hard upbringing. What I like about Nick's character is it brings up this thing that some people struggle with in high school and in college and at different times. And I struggled with it a little bit more in college, which is like a neediness, a codependency. And at the same time, he's also kind of a victim of rumor and innuendo about things that have happened to him in his past and all of that. So what do you think about Nick Andopoulos? I actually feel like he might be one of the more complex characters to dissect, because on one hand, you don't really know. You see a lot of him. You see a lot of his house. You see a little bit of his dad and his home life. So there's not much mystery there, but there's a lot of mystery going on underneath the surface with him, because he's so stoned and he's so out of it that then there are those moments like where he can't find weed, where he's like, playing basketball and he looks great and all that. So a little bit of a complex character with an unknown. I mean, he's going into the military almost certainly when they graduate. So I don't know. It's interesting to think about what would have happened with Nick if we had seen more. But what did you think about him and Jason Segel's performance?
You're really right about that. He really is complex. On the surface, you wouldn't even think about that. But I love the way you brought up the codependent thing. It becomes such a big part of his character, his obsession really with Lindsay. That's a great point. I mean, he's really interesting. I think I start with this character with Jason Segel. And I was thinking about, it's not that I don't like Jason Segel. He's not one of my favorites, though. And I really tried to delve into why I'm not drawn to him like, I don't know, like a Steve Carell or a Paul Rudd, somebody who has a little more appeal. Like what bothers me about Jason Segel? And I had to go back and say, what's the first thing you've seen him in? Of course, not having seen Freaks and Geeks when it came out. And I think the first movie I saw him in was Forgetting Sarah Marshall. Did you ever see that?
Yeah, which he wrote. Yeah, I did see that.
He was basically, co-creator and writer of that film. And then later on, maybe right after that, I saw I Love You, Man, where he stars opposite Paul Rudd, and Rashida Jones is in that, and some other people. It's really good, and he plays a good part in that. It's very funny. Not a very
and he wrote the Muppets movie, right? In 2011.
He was really involved in with Disney and Henson and reinvigorating the whole Muppet franchise. Like apparently he was really a big fan. So he was really integral in the whole Muppet thing too, later on. And
of course, I mean, he's very famous these days for How I Met Your Mother as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So. Oh, right. That's right. I forgot about that.
He's in that whole run. Yeah.
Totally forgot about that. He's a really interesting character, though. Of course, he's one of our iconic, one of our main freaks. And there was a couple of things about the character that I thought was really cool. He's an avid drummer. He's like, his passion is drumming. He has the iconic 29-piece drum set in his basement and all that kind of stuff. But he's not really that, for all his passion, he's not really that talented. I like that in a character because it speaks to the reality. We're not always the greatest at the thing that we love the most. And I love that about the character. And I think it informs the character a little bit too, as far as like just speaking to his frustrations, maybe his home life. It's like his escape, or the thing that he really sort of delves into in a hedonistic way, or as a way to get away from life and his militaristic dad and all that kind of stuff. I guess knowing that you're not going to be able to do that in your future, like that's not going to be your future, you're just not gifted enough at it, is really interesting. And we see that with the Nick character, and you know, the dad that runs the tight ship, and how frustrating it is that he's just not interested in doing a good job in school, and he develops this crush, you know, / obsession with Lindsay. It's an interesting character, and the way that, you know, he's really not getting that nurturing or that empathy at home, and then he has to get that out of Lindsay's dad, you know, who's a stranger, and, you know, just speaks to the quality of his home life, where he's, you know, his dad's providing for him, but he's not providing anything emotional. You know, he's not speaking to his kid like, all right, like, we know he never had a drum lesson at a certain point, for all his passion and all the money he's put into this and all the time he's put into this hobby. And, you know, you think about a dad, like if you had a child who is that interested in this thing, which is wholesome, you know, it's like maybe keep you out of trouble, keep you away from drugs and alcohol and doing the wrong thing, like something you could really wrap your time up in. You want to nurture that in your kid. You know, that's a gift. As a parent, that's a gift. Like if your kid finds something like that, you sort of do everything you can to fuel that for them. He doesn't have any of that. So he's a really interesting character. I think what's interesting about him, you could see in the opening sequence, like he has this awkwardness and this insecurity to him, where he's just, you know, you could see he's really not comfortable in his own skin. You know, there's just a little bit, he's just a little unsettled. He's not sure of himself. He doesn't really quite always know what to say. I think that's really interesting in a character like this, because you have this tall kid, this freak character that would probably be intimidating for the other high school characters, but he doesn't really know how to act. You know, maybe it's the lack of the mother figure in his life. He doesn't really know how to carry himself. He has that really telltale awkwardness that I think we could relate to as, you know, one-time high schoolers.
Yeah, and I also like how we learn about his brothers. I think he only mentions them once or twice, but he calls them psycho, and that they're all in the military or whatever. So it's interesting, like, to kind of just glean something out of his experience and what it's all about for him. But I really dig the scene with him and Lindsay when Lindsay's trying to break up with him, and she goes over to the house and he's like, wait, he's playing drums. And he's like, wait, I got to tell you something. And then he tells her about the ex. Like, there's this rumor that he's like crazy about the ex-girlfriend, but he's actually the victim. And it stops Lindsay from doing what she wants to do, which is like to break. She doesn't like him. It doesn't matter. It buys him some time, I guess, with her. But you learn that like not everything is as it seems with him. Like he was looked at as this obsessive dude and cut his girlfriend out. But then you learn that like, well, he was writing like love poems to this girl, and she just showed everyone them.
Yeah.
You know, and like, so who is the bad guy, you know, in that situation? So a little bit of texture there for Nick too. And I dig his inclusion in this show, but we do have to talk next about Ken Miller. Alex Gold wrote into us on Patreon and says, "Hey geeks, what do you think of Seth Rogen's performance as Ken Miller? He is known for playing the funny, clumsy stoner in roles filmed after the show ended, but I think his Freaks and Geeks role showed that he has more range in his acting ability, and I wouldn't mind seeing more examples of this." I don't know. I don't know that I really agree with that synopsis. I'm wondering what you think. I feel like Seth Rogen's performance is actually fairly mundane, and the character is... We learn more about the character later on, and it's interesting. We learn that his parents are affluent and educated, but totally aloof and detached. And we obviously have his whole, finally, he's like attracted to the tuba girl and stuff, but he's usually the third or fifth wheel.
Yes.
And usually just making fun of everyone, being a downer and whatever. I'm not crazy about this character, actually. I like Seth Rogen a lot, but I feel like out of all of the main characters in the show, the one of Ken might be my least favorite. What do you think? Yeah,
they didn't give Seth Rogen much to work with for like the first 15 episodes of the show. I mean, they really didn't. He starts out and goes for quite a while as sort of the prototypical wise ass of the group, right? The guy who's standing around, who you only hear from when he cracks a joke, usually directed at you, some self, some never self-effacing, never self-deprecating, always sort of lashing out at somebody, always sarcastic, sardonic, that sort of guy. And at first it bothered me that they weren't giving the character more. And then I realized, like, you know what? He's kind of like, if you look at him as like Daniel's lackey, he's like, you knew that guy, like the bully, the right-hand man of the bully in high school, who was usually pretty quiet, taciturn, but would only say, either echo what his boss said or just make a wise ass remark of some kind, sarcastic remark, intimidating because he was so quiet, and you never knew what that character was thinking. Sort of like, think about like a Crabbe or a Goyle to Malfoy, right? Like that type of dude. And he operates like in that capacity for like the first 14 or 15 episodes, Ken does. And then that was an interesting turn to learn that he was virtually raised by a nanny because his affluent parents were both working so much. Who knows? I don't know what they did, but that was interesting because you never think of a bully type character to have that sort of background. Again, sort of defying the conventional, ways of TV and movies, which is really interesting. And then, of course, they give him, they give the Tin Man some heart eventually when he develops the crush on Tuba Girl, Amy, the Amy character, where he's like, that was a really neat turn because you went from having this cold character who you only see ever making fun of somebody for a line or two to developing, a heart, warmth, and basically getting like googly-eyed for this girl and like developing this huge crush on her, and then having the relationship, and then dealing with the fact that Amy was born a hermaphrodite, and then dealing with that was one of the great funny turns of the show where he had to like sort of introspectively find out if he was gay or not because he was developed in the hermaphrodite, and he had the straight porn and the gay porn. It's just like that kind of stuff is just like comedy gold for me. That was a great moment with the character. But again, like they spent, a dozen episodes virtually ignoring this character or relegating him to sort of a background role, which was interesting. And again, like one of the great laments of like, wow, we could have got so much more out of Ken, maybe found out more about his family, had the show just gone on a bit longer.
Yeah, it's too bad, because I think that scene with the porn is the only scene you even see of him in his house. So we don't really even get a feel for his setting, where he goes home at night and all that. It would have been cool to get to know him a little bit more in that regard. But and we won't bring her up anymore. But Tuba Girl, I thought that was interesting just because I thought the hermaphrodite thing was strange. I think it's strange even through today's lens, where trans whatever is still, is like much more. I mean, in the 80s, that's not a thing, but I just thought that was weird. And I feel like that could have only been pulled out of someone's experience, because it's like, really, like she's a hermaphrodite. I have to actually look this up, but I really feel like, hold on, I'm going to look it up right now.
Okay.
What percentage of people are hermaphrodites? 0.018%.
All right, so that's small.
So it's no one. So almost no one. So I found that just strange, because I was like, what? Because I didn't even remember that from the original. And then he tells his friends, and it's all like, wow, she's embarrassed, and she should be. I mean, it's not something she should be embarrassed, but she should be embarrassed that a high school knows about her private life. But I just felt that was like the one component where I'm like, what?
It's a great point. I didn't even think about it that way. It is very cartoony, very exaggerated. I almost wonder if they thought about, we're working backwards into it. Like, how can we make this character have an identity crisis where he doesn't know if he's gay or straight? And then, sort of working backwards is, oh, maybe Amy's a hermaphrodite. Maybe he has that scene where it's like, maybe they just sort of thought about that scene when he has the two porn magazines and he's trying to decide, like, and then worked backwards into it. I can't see this writing team working that way. But who knows? I think about sometimes, you know how it is, Kyle, when you're writing something, the germ of an idea could be the smallest thing, and then you build out around that. You have that nucleus that might be kind of odd, but then you structure everything around that sort of. Yeah,
you justify it by making a buttress around it.
Exactly.
That supports it. So I totally understand what you're saying.
So maybe.
All right, we haven't talked about Kim yet. And to do so, I want to talk to, or hear from rather, Joey Gondoliker, who wrote into us on Patreon. He says, hey, Dagan and Colin.
Hello.
Can we just acknowledge how good Kim Kelly's transformation is across the series? She starts out as a stereotypical mean girl who doesn't want more people in the group, but ends as Lindsay's friend and the one she chooses to ride along with as they leave at the end of the series. Growth like that in teenage characters isn't seen too often, and I think it's really neat. Love the show. Thanks, guys. This is one of the things where I feel like I agree. I love the evolution of Kim. I love learning more about Kim. I especially love Kim's mom, and we'll talk about that in a minute because she's fucking awesome in another show.
Good.
But I feel like this is one of those situations I was bringing up earlier where it's like, slow down, you know? And I know that they didn't have the opportunity to do that, but what I really would have loved to have seen is if we got 2 or 3 seasons. I think they're in 11th grade, so maybe they do one more season and it's like their 12th grade year. And maybe it's that like Kim and Lindsay move away together or do something like that. Like if you just gave it a little bit more time, I liked that because I liked that the 2 girls ended up together, the 2 enemies as it were in the beginning. And I loved Kim's kind of hostility towards Lindsay. And I think a lot of it was like, she was the girl, right? Like she's the girl in the group. We don't want another girl who's as pretty as I am, another girl who's smarter and I think that Kim's fears were assuaded when she realized Lindsay wasn't into Daniel.
Yeah.
And once I think that became clear, ostensibly clear, I think that she was less cold. And then we obviously got a lot of insight into Kim's character, seeing her home life. I feel bad for Kim, though. There was another one of those slow down or like what happened moments where, and I was a little confused by this, where like Kim asks Lindsay at some point, like, what do your parents say about me? And most people in this situation would lie. There's no reason not to lie unless it's a positive thing. And she says, well, like they say you're a burnout and you're a loser and you don't do your homework and you're a slut and all these kinds of things. And it's like, whoa, you know, like what? And why would you tell her that? And then they bring her home anyway, and it's like not as awkward as it would be. I feel like there's a little bit of a loss in translation and in the way that they combine these 2 characters and make them friends, quick friends. But the show doesn't work without Kim. And I think Busy Phillips does a really great job in this performance as a believable 16-year-old girl.
Yeah.
You know? So what do you think about the character of Kim Kelly?
Yeah, man. I mean, Busy Phillips, I mean, I called her Kelly before. I apologize for that. Kim Kelly. I mean, Busy Phillips just transcends being Busy Phillips. She becomes this character and really a familiar character, you know, sort of the high school tough girl, the compatriot of like the freaks who you think about in the beginning as sort of the bullies, but they're not. But that's sort of the analog in the beginning for her. And I like what you said about, you know, feeling like in the beginning, I was really annoyed about this character because she is competitive with Lindsay. Lindsay's trying to break into this group and the Kim character is intimidated by it. You know, she really does want to be the female of the group. She doesn't want another Calamity Jane in the posse. And she becomes one of those characters that's really unnerving because, you know, every time Lindsay tries to get close, she's going to repel her with some kind of shitty comment or by doing something. And it's that, you know, I think it's in feeling for Lindsay and sort of, you know, you're kind of ride or die for Lindsay. And you know, her dealings with Kim are going to be negative in the beginning every time she gets around her. And I was really unnerved by that. Maybe because you deal with people like that in your life. You know, the people that you think are sort of welcoming you, but they're hot. They kind of run hot and cold. You don't never really know what you're getting. And eventually you get pushed out when you least expect it. There's a mean-spiritedness to it. I've known people like that through my whole life, you know, where you never know if you're going to get person A or person B. There's sort of a bipolar nature to it. And, you know, Kim was just really defending herself. She was defending her position in that group. And it made it really uncomfortable for me at first. But there is they form a real demonstrative friendship through the whole thing. And, you know, becomes like, you know, they become thick. Lindsay and Kim become thick as thieves.
Yeah. Do you think
after a while?
Do you think, I mean, just projecting forward, do you think they remain friends after high school and into college?
I do think so. And I think they probably will end up rubbing off each other in a positive way. You know, Lindsay. Not rubbing on each other. Maybe. I mean, it could happen. It could happen. But you know what I mean? Like, yeah, Lindsay's a cool character because she wants to change her identity, maybe the way she dresses, who she hangs out with, the music that she listens to, but she's still that smart kid underneath. She still has the family values. She's still a good friend, all that kind of thing for the most part. We could talk about the Millie thing a little bit, but you know, she is who she is, but maybe she gets a little bit of that sort of like rebelliousness or that healthy acting out or not wanting to be so buttoned up from the Kim character. And maybe in return, Kim could give her, you know, Lindsay gives her like the thing of like, you could be this person, you could have fun, you could be a little hedonistic, but, you know, try to do a little better in school or trying to think about what you want to do for the future. So they could really, sort of like
influence each other.
Each other in a positive way.
Totally. You know, I agree with you. And so I wanted to go a little deeper into into Kim, because we do get a little bit of her home life. And I feel like people like Kim Kelly don't come out of nothing. I don't feel like there's people like Kim Kelly that go home to ostentatious wealth. I don't feel like there are people like Kim Kelly that go home towards good parents.
Yeah.
That care. What we find out about Kim is that so first of all, we meet her mom, Cookie. Now, Cookie is played by Ann Dowd.
Yes.
Ann Dowd is, first of all, awesome. And she plays my very, very favorite character in Handmaid's Tale, Aunt Lydia, for which she has won 2 Emmys already for it. Yeah, she's fucking awesome. So in The Handmaid's Tale, there are this it's all about classes of people, and there's a class called the Aunts, and they're like the religious people that are like in some position of power, and she plays Aunt Lydia, and she's awesome. Oh, she's fucking awesome.
I gotta watch it just for her.
Oh, dude, she's great.
She's the best character actress maybe on the planet. She's in Hereditary too.
Yeah, she is. Yeah, she's awesome.
Oh
she's in a bunch
God,
of stuff.
She's so good.
But we meet her. She's in 2 episodes, and we find out some interesting things about her. First of all, her dad's illiterate, right? They bring that up, there's, you know, like her brother's like totally tanked out on the couch.
The house has no sheetrock in it.
Right. There's no sheetrock anywhere. Like
it's one room.
And it's clear that it's a situation of significant domestic violence. Whether it's literal violence remains to be seen. It seems like it probably is, but at the very least, it's emotional. They speed out of there, you know, after that dinner and all of that, and they're lying to the parents. And so what did you think about Kim's kind of home life and all that? I liked how we kind of got a little taste of it, and I wish we got a little bit more, because built into it, especially with Cookie, is like a jealousy and an envy. She keeps bringing up over and over again this, that, and the other thing about your parents' wealth and their money and where they live and all of that, and how she used to have this and she used to have that. So she's really caught up on it. And Cookie is really just a 20-year-older version of her own daughter, which is why Kim needs to like veer left or right real quick before she ends up just like her mom. So I like that they gave us a little bit of that insight. In fact, we get more insight into her than any of the other characters, which I don't know if that was originally the intent. I feel like they realized that there was something special with Kim apart from just the female rivalry in the group.
Yeah, you're right. They do flesh her out very early. Right after the Weirs, we meet the Kellys, and we don't meet some of the other protagonists' families for many episodes in the future. So they really do flesh her out early. And you're right. The parent, we know there's some sort of desperation with that. And we're very lucky to not grow up in that situation where you know that there's, the clock's ticking. Her parents are complete no accounts. For whatever reason, they live in basically this hut. All but like this house with no sheetrock in it. It was very funny to see, the brother's bedridden, supposedly had some sort of accident, right? A motorcycle accident or something. And he's laying in the bed, but you could see him from the kitchen because there's no walls.
Yeah, because they say we're trying to do the place again or whatever. And there's just nothing,
And I wonder now, this may be reading too far into it, but I wonder now if that speaks of domestic violence, is the walls being shattered and punched and kicked and everything like that. There's no sheetrock in the house. That's, it's kind of odd. And,
yeah, it's a little ominous maybe. Yeah.
They're having their Kentucky Fried Chicken dinner. She's wondering why Kim didn't bring home the bottle of soda. And, there's just really an abusive, argumentative, broken family dynamic there that, seems it's so exaggerated. It's so bad that in 5 minutes you realize this is irreparable. This is just broke for good. And it speaks to that character of what she's dealing with. And the fact that she could be a character like that could still come around and still be taught how to be sweet and still be taught that, you know, you're not in this dead end life, and that she could be sweet to Millie after she accidentally runs over her dog, and that she has the capacity to still be, you know, show those humanistic qualities despite, like, you know, being brought up in the worst possible conditions is really cool. And, you know, again, it's like you got so much of the Kim character. It would have been really great to see more. And one thing that I didn't find out about, although I researched it a little bit, is why they give Busy Phillips like a co-star billing.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. Very because strange. She's not. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know, because I love the intro. I only watch it once, so like I typically skip intros, but I do love the intro of them getting their school pictures taken and stuff. It's very cool. And she's not in it, and I feel like that was because I don't think she was supposed to be a main character, and I feel like they kind of got her to that point, you know. So
yeah,
that's what I was thinking too. I'm like, I assume if they were going to do a second season, they would have filmed this again and gotten a new intro with that, put the appropriate characters in as they now were billed. But yeah, I noticed that too. I thought it was weird.
Did you see, Kyle? She has Busy Phillips has. I don't know. I'm not too familiar with her. I know she had a talk show for a while. I know she was involved with Colin Hanks for a long time. Like, they were an item for years.
Mm-hmm.
But apparently she wrote some sort of biography. And in the book, she talks about, you know, James Franco was embroiled in some sort of sexual allegations not too long ago. But earlier than that, apparently had a run-in with Busy Phillips on the show and basically assaulted her, like threw her down.
Really?
In some way. And she writes about it in the book. And I think her and James Franco have since smoothed it out and are cool. But when they were kids, apparently this thing happened. At least she wrote about it. And she got really aggravated and upset that item or that account from her book, where it was like this abusive little thing with James Franco, was the thing that people pulled from the book the most. Where I know she's really, if I'm not mistaken, she's a big feminist, and she's involved in abortion and pro-rights, abortion rights activists and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like pro-choice stuff. Yeah.
She's super into that. But I think what people pulled out of that book, of course, was like this fascinating account of like James Franco basically abused her on the set. And that was one thing I was just wondering if you ever heard of that. Or
no, I never heard that.
Really
I know that Franco has some. I don't know enough about this stuff to even have a commentary on it.
There's some dirt.
Yeah,
apparently.
I'm sure there is.
Allegedly.
But you wouldn't know Busy Phillips too much because she became, I think, actually quite famous from Dawson's Creek, which was just a little bit later. And she had to turn on ER, and she was in that show for a really long time, Cougar Town, and like other stuff. So she's done a lot, but yeah, she's bouncing around still, and
she's good. She's really good in this.
I agree. So there's a couple of teacher characters, Dig, I wanted to talk about that we haven't brought up yet. And because we had brought up, obviously, Rosso. So I want to bring up first Benjamin Fredericks, the gym teacher. I think this, played by Tom Wilson, I think this character rocks. I love this character. I think he's hysterical. I even like how they have him dating Bill's mom, although that's another situation where I'm like, spend more time with this. You know, like the scene with him in Dallas with the coach is really cute. And when he's explaining it to him, and he says he'll explain more at the commercial, and you can tell the coach is really frustrated because there's like a basketball game on and he wants to watch. And I don't mind that arc. I just wish they spent more time with it. But I think this character's great. I think this character is so funny. I love the sex ed thing where he like has him try to point out where the vagina is and all this stuff and makes him go up there. He's funny as fuck. I mean, this is one of the great teacher characters, I think, in TV. What do you think about Coach Fredericks?
I was so excited to see him. I mean, you're so excited to see Biff from Back to the Future, first of all.
Definitely.
But he's so good. Like, Tom Wilson is so good, dude. He's like really, really good in the role. And again, like one of those characters that they give so much more texture to. At first, you think like this is going to be the typical blowhard, you know, militaristic, pro-jock gym teacher who just has no sensitivity to the kids who are maybe a little less athletic, the quote unquote nerds. And they kind of paint him like that in the beginning. And then you get the scene, which is one of my favorite scenes and probably the first emotional scene in the series that really struck me, where right before he's sort of, like you said, chastising, I think it's Sam for not knowing where the sexual reproduction parts are and stuff like that. And he's sort of being a bully and sort of embarrassing Sam in front of the class. And then they have this sweet moment at the end where he's like, you know what? Sam's talking to him in the office and he's like, you know what? You know what the whole thing was? They were disturbed. Sam was disturbed by the porno that they saw.
Right. Which was, the reel to reel, which is
the
awesome.
real porno or whatever, which is, that's amazing. I mean, that's what you were dealing with prior to VHS, right?
I also love because they were trying to tell the joke. Like they didn't know, it was all because they didn't understand one of the jokes that was being told. And that was actually like a really very clever.
That was a great thread. I forgot about that. It's a good point.
I agree.
But then, he sits him down. Coach sits him down, Sam, in his back office after class, and you don't hear it. They just play the music over it, and you see them talking and laughing together. And you see, like, wow, this guy, he's taking the time with a kid. He's trying to present the thing that he knows the kid's disturbed by with humor.
Probably not something a teacher should be talking to a kid about anyway.
It's inappropriate, and he's making this effort, and it's like, wow. And then that plays into later on when he gets involved, when Coach gets involved with Bill's mom, that he's not a scumbag. He's actually, his intentions are true. His intentions are right-minded. They're completely pure. He really is in love with Bill's mom. So you get a little bit of that early, then you realize like there's more to this guy. He's not just this insensitive, overgrown jock. Which was so cool. And, I didn't know Tom Wilson was that good of an actor. You don't really get that from Biff,
No.
But he's great.
And I didn't know this in reading about Tom Wilson because I was like, oh shit, that's Biff. I don't even think I realized that the first time I saw the show. But I was reading his filmography and you might know this, or you probably do because you're an animator, but he is in a shit ton of animation.
Oh, a lot of VO.
He does a lot of VO, including with like SpongeBob and a bunch of other stuff. So yeah, I didn't know that. So he's still working. And yeah, I think the character's great. And I really feel like that was another character that they introduced and they realized was resonating and was perfectly executed and quite relatable. I think we all know the weird gym teacher and how no one really I always feel bad to say this because I know that people do teach gym and physical education and stuff, but it's like no one really takes it seriously. I don't really quite understand why it's even in school. It's not supposed to be. Like I always felt that in giving a student balance, I think music and art and home economics or whatever make much more sense than gym. Sorry, I'm playing with the ISO on my camera.
That's you know what, Kyle, let me talk to you about gym teachers for a minute. We never talked about this.
Please.
Did you have any my gym teachers sucked in high school.
Who'd you have?
They were all right out of a John Hughes movie, What about yours?
Well, I had Coach Sip, who was the football coach.
I don't know too much about him.
So we have like a really very famous football program where we're from.
Yeah.
In fact, I think I said this, when you enter Bellport, there's a huge sign that just says all of the years that we won like the New York State Championship and the Long Island Championship.
It's a dynasty.
It's like all anyone cares about. Yeah, it's total dynasty. We have a beautiful field. It's named Joseph Field after the coach. And he was my coach and my gym teacher for I think 3 of my 4 years in high school. And I actually liked him because it's to the point I didn't think he was that bad. I was like, perfectly nice person.
He didn't
give a shit. I mean, he didn't give a shit. I don't blame him because we didn't give a shit. It was kind of like a symbiotic thing. And I remember the football players used to just go watch film. I don't know if you remember that. They used to just go into his and for their gym session, they would just be allowed to go watch film.
I don't remember that.
So like we would just go to, and so Coach Sip never had anything organized, which was awesome. Unless we had to do like the race, or like, this, he would just be like, open the gym. He would open the weight room, throw a bunch of basketballs out, throw a bunch of, whatever. And then just be like,
yes.
And then just go to his office.
I do remember that. Yeah. He was always very quiet. He wasn't one of the ones I had any real problems with.
Yeah. He wasn't like curious. A dick. I just don't think, I think he just wanted to coach football. And I think the thing is that as I understood it later, it was explained to me that like Bellport wanted him to just coach the football team, but it's cheaper, I guess, to have him also as a gym teacher.
Makes sense.
As opposed to paying him as the coach and then hiring another gym teacher.
Sure,
and I think that was the entire intent, which is hysterical when you think about it. Because they probably would have had to pay him, 6 figures to come coach the team anyway.
Yeah.
So might as well just throw some fucking gym classes at him. So I understand. No, I had no interactions with him that were negative though. So the other teacher that I wanted to bring up, there are other teachers, but Frank Kolchevsky, I needed to bring up the math teacher, specifically because there's that scene, or it's really the episode when Daniel cheats with Lindsay on the test.
Yes.
And you really start to realize that Kolchevsky's a bad dude. He's not a good dude. And he's talking about how he's a burnout and a loser and you don't want guys like that and all that. And it's like, man, you should be the last one saying this. So that scene stuck with me a lot and kind of painted this character, which I think was intended. We find out he's a Vietnam veteran.
Yeah.
And he does bring up that, like, those are the guys that I knew guys like that in Vietnam, and those are the guys that got us killed or whatever. And I thought that was kind of interesting too, especially because he didn't seem young enough to have fought in Vietnam. So
yeah, that's a good point.
He might have been there really early on when it was like real hairy, which also paints that character, you know. Shout out to Uncle John, who taught me that. So, what did you think of this character played by Steve Banas?
Yeah, he was interesting. He was a constant. He always seemed like, besides being the teacher, he was always in the halls. He was always the one reprimanding the kids in the halls. He seemed like one of those dudes, like that it seemed like they just pulled him out of some school and put him there. He seemed like such a real life teacher. You know, he just felt so real in that role. Little intimidating, little sarcastic, very short fuse, no real patience, doesn't seem very happy to be doing it. The Vietnam arc was interesting because he doesn't seem like a contemporary to the oldest high school kids.
He might have been an officer or something. I don't know. You know,
maybe. You know, maybe he's in some kind of officer capacity, which could have meant. Well, I guess he would be too young for
Korea. World War II or Korea.
But just one of those characters that really grounded it for me. Like, really felt like a real. It didn't feel like, you know, it felt, you know, a lot. It made this series feel very Fast Times to me, where all the characters in that feel a little bit cartoony and exaggerated and fun,
like
but
Mr.
still
Hand.
grounded.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
They feel like they would really be like Mr. Hand.
Right.
You know, like Mr. Hand is kind of a cartoon character, but you buy it. You know, this felt like
he rules.
The Kolchevsky character just felt like, you know, yeah, that was one of my teachers.
When Mr. Hand rips up his schedule, it's like one of the.
It's classic, dude.
That character's out of control. I love
it's
Mr.
so
Hand.
good, dude.
And when he comes over at the end of the episode and like sits in his bedroom with him,
I feel like Apatow and Feig were really looking at, you know, Cameron Crowe and Amy Heckerling and Fast Times specifically for the series. The series feels so much like one of those, like, you know, John Hughesy in a way, but less stylized. It feels there's a reality in it that I think
it's less sentimental than John Hughes, you know, which is, and I love John Hughes and I love sentimentality, but this doesn't have that sentimentality, and I think that it's pretty obvious that they were inspired by Heckerling and Fast Times,
definitely,
just because it you kind of have this. I wish the problem with Spicoli is some of his favorite quotes I can't even say, so. You know, those guys are, you know, like that line is like one of them. Because it doesn't
work.
Yeah, you can't, because you have to use it through the 1980 context. Because actually, I was talking to Micah even, I was like, wow, you know, this show was on Freaks and Geeks, was on NBC. We were watching some of the episodes and I was like, wow, they called those guys homos.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know. I think they might have said fags or something at some point too. Something else that was homophobic, and I'm like, that would have never been allowed on NBC today. You know,
they got red flagged a couple of times
thing.
Even back then from NBC. Like, I think episode 4 or something, they had to really tidy it up. Like, they really tried to push the envelope a little bit with this show. And, you know, this was network TV. That's what I was saying. I think Helene was saying, because I was watching the episodes before the kids went to bed. I started in during the last few weeks, and she was like, just wait. I was like, this was on NBC, you know? And then if something inappropriate came up, I would just pause it, you know, and let the kids go to bed. But yeah, this was on network television, man. This was, you know, this was pushing the margins pretty far out for back then.
Definitely. And so let's go to this final question, or one of the final questions. We have a couple more I want to get into, but I got those from the network. All right. John Devine wrote in and said, hey guys, I just wanted to give a shout out to some of the minor characters from the series that I find to be quite memorable. Dig, I know this first one he's going to bring up is going to be one you're going to want to talk about. Although I'm going to read through everything before we get into any of them.
Okay.
Howie, played by Jason Schwartzman, the salesperson at the Disco clothing store who also sells non-distinct fake IDs to Lindsay and her friends. I love how he sells them like Alberta licenses. Hebert, played by young Shia LaBeouf, the school mascot until he broke his arm and his mother wouldn't let him sleep because she was afraid he'd fall into a post-concussion coma. Karen Scarfoli, played by young Rashida Jones, who picks on Sam and writes pygmy yeek on his locker. What are you looking at, Bilbo Baggins? Which is one of the great lines. And finally, Kim's brother Chip, played by Mike White, who got jumped by a bunch of cops and probably has brain damage. Quiet down, you're gonna wake up Chip. Keep up all the great content coming. Really excited for this episode. Thanks. You can hear it in Ann Dowd's voice too, which is awesome.
Ann Dowd's range. I mean, her fucking range, dude. Like, I mean,
wait until you see her as Aunt Lydia, dude. Wait until you see her in fucking Handmaid's Tale.
Oh, dude, I can't.
When she plays one of the most sinister ass characters you've ever seen.
Dude, I can't. I honestly can't wait. She plays the incestuous sister at the end of True Detective too. Do you remember?
Yep, that's true.
Dude,
yeah,
she's
she's great.
What can't she do?
Yeah, she can't. We were gushing over her in that episode too.
Oh my God,
in that episode for True Detective season 1, which we did last year. So go check that out if you want. So, Dave, let's get into some of these characters. We don't have to talk about all of them, but there's definitely some that I want to talk about. And I want to start because I know you have such a passion for Jason Schwartzman. We only see Howie Gelfland, I think, in 1 or 2 episodes. I think it's only 1 episode. What did you think of his performance? Because I know you're such a fan of him.
So, it was so good to see him pop up. I love him. I mean, from the Wes Anderson movies, I fell in love with Jason Schwartzman, probably starting with Rushmore, which must have come right after this. It was so good to see him pop up.
I think Rushmore's even before. I think Rushmore might be before this.
It might. Is it 2000?
Let me look.
Don't quote me. Again,
I'm looking. Rushmore film 1998.
Is 2008?
1998.
Oh, 1998. Okay.
Yeah. Oh my God, I just almost fucking broke you.
Oh,
no,
I was like, what? I can't be that off. Holy shit.
It's 1998. Yeah. So it's a couple years before. So I know you're a huge fan of his. So
good. It was so good. And I love the whole thing with the disco clothing store. And it felt like very, and I love the things with spending time in the mall. Felt very emblematic of the 80s. But yeah, it was so cool to see him pop up. And one of my favorite laugh out loud moments was actually revealing the pictures on the IDs he creates. Yeah. They're all like completely like, they're terrible. Like they're just not even close.
I love that they're just all Alberta licenses. I mean, that's the funniest thing is like he's just giving these guys, and it's like one of them is like a Spanish guy who's like 28 or something like that. It's great.
And then Ken's like, well, that's close enough. Ken takes it.
He keeps it. Yeah. How about Ben Stiller, who pops up in the last episode as the Secret Service agent? I love his scene with Rosso. I think it's awesome.
The Secret Service agent who's perpetually stuck on vice presidential detail.
Yeah.
And just like sort of lamenting his lot in life.
Like no one's going to try to kill his target.
And then has the sit down, like the heart to heart with Mr. Rosso. Like that was so good. Ben Stiller's so good, dude. He's just like,
pretty just big deal that they got him to come into this. He was huge. I mean, he's always been huge, but he was huge in 2001. Yeah, huge.
Man. He was at the height.
That was Zoolander and all that stuff. Meet the Parents and everything. I mean, he was big deal at that point.
Absolutely. Yeah, he was at the height of his powers already back then. Yeah, for sure.
And he brought up Shia LaBeouf, who plays Herbert. I forgot. I didn't even realize when I first saw it that was him. And then when I saw it again, this past week, I was like, oh my God, Shia LaBeouf.
He's so young.
I actually think he's great actually at that role. Like
he's a good actor, dude.
He is pretty good. Yeah, he's pretty good in this role.
I mean, we think about him in Indiana Jones and we think about his public, blow ups that he's had and stuff like that. But I fell in love with Shia LaBeouf in Disney's Even Stevens, which was basically like a series on Disney TV, a live action thing, obviously, where it's him and his older sister, and it sort of centers around their misadventures. And the character is like this really business savvy, like this really punky, bratty, but business savvy kid. And he opens up a taqueria in the janitor closet in the show and like goes into business for himself. And I was just, from that episode on of that show, I was like, this is the best show and the best kid ever. I love this.
I love that. I love that. What about Gordon Crisp, played by Jerry Messing?
Dude, I love this character. He's so fun. Like, they kind of present him as every junior high school has one, like the stinky kid. And then he becomes like a satellite, like Harris, who we have to talk about, comes like a satellite member of the Geeks. But he's just so sweet. Like he's always chiming in. Sweet. He's got that, he's got that lovable chubby thing going on. And I love his name. I mean, that's the best name ever, Gordon Crisp.
Yeah, it's awesome. It makes me feel like, we all knew the obese, smelly kid in high school. It made me feel bad for that kid more.
Oh, definitely.
Because a lot of people don't. And I've said in the past that like, I don't know that I was ever bullied anyone, but I used to make fun of the fat kid once in a while with that, And I feel bad about that because I never got a chance to know him.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like,
definitely.
who is he? It's sad, you know? So, what about when we brought her up already, but Millie Kenter, played by Sarah Hagen? This character's great. I feel like she, like you said, they were going to bring her more in, and you could tell that they were wanting to bring her more in because she was great. You know, she's super fucking funny. Like, she's when she pops up, it's just so. It's so funny. What'd you make of Millie?
She's great, man. I mean, she feels like one, you know, sort of the holy roller girl, the good girl, the prude. We all knew those in high school that were sort of wore their heart on their sleeve when it came to usually they were, not the stereotype, but usually they were Christian kids that were really into like their youth group, and they would be involved on church like every, you know, Saturdays and Sundays. That was their life. That was their social life. It came from their family. And the cool thing about Millie, though, is she's the touchstone to Lindsay's past. And she constantly reminds us of that. Like, she's the best friend that Lindsay left behind. We know they have a history. They've known each other since they were very little girls. And it's so sweet because Millie really misses Lindsay. And Lindsay sort of pushes her away and takes advantage of her a little bit. But Millie always sticks in there because she really loves Lindsay. And, you know, again, like dialing back into giving us glimpses of what it used to be like for Lindsay, what she walked away from, the mathletes, all that kind of stuff. I love the Millie character because she always reminded us of that and gave us a little glimpses into, you know, what Lindsay evolved from, which was really cool. And just besides just having that look, you know, that she has like a little bit of a goofiness to her. You know, she has a little bit of like worldliness and wisdom, but it's like only beholden to like her religious upbringing. It's not really, right. It's not real wisdom. It's just like beyond her years wisdom, maybe. So it's interesting.
Before we get into the character, we must speak about. I do want to give one more shout out to an exterior character here, Alan White, played by Chauncey Leopardi. Weird thing about this character is that a lot of people tell me I look like this actor, and I don't think so at all. I don't think so at all.
No,
but it's another one of those things like Anthony Bourdain. Remember we talked about that, where a lot of people tell me I look like Anthony Bourdain. I'm like, I don't think so.
I don't see that either.
But he plays kind of like the bully. Now this is another one, and he's great. He's awesome in his role. But this is another one of those situations where it's like, slow down. Alan almost kills.
Yeah, dude.
Bill, and they don't really ever circle back to it, you know? And I'm like, well, why not?
Never.
Like,
they never do.
It's weird. Like, he literally almost murdered. I would assume if that really happened, even in 1980, 1981, you would have been expelled. You'd have been done. You know, your school could have easily gotten sued and you would go away for manslaughter, even at that age, probably. So I always thought that was a little weird, but you have to have the bully of the geeks. If it's not going to be the freaks, then it's got to be someone else. And he pretty ostensibly plays that role very well.
Definitely. He's one of those bullies. He doesn't really have the physical tools. You almost question, like, Sam, just beat the crap out of him. Like, what? Like, he's not this big hulking dude. He's not intimidating physically. He's just mean. You know, he's just one of those mean-spirited kids. And I love the way they flesh him out a little bit when he does almost kill Bill. There you go. Maybe that's where Quentin Tarantino got it from.
Could be.
When his dad comes to the hospital and sort of makes him apologize and everything, you see, like, this guy doesn't come from some, like, you know, home life where he's neglected and stuff like that. His parents are in the mix, you know, so that's interesting. Like, what's firing this, you know, what's making this bully operate the way he operates, you know, and he has his little posse that echo everything he says and stuff like that. It felt very realistic. And that episode is meaningful because Bill has him in the hospital there and sort of invites him into the fold. Even after he almost tries to kill him, he's like, we got the sci-fi convention this weekend. You should come along. And you could see the things firing off, the neurons firing off in Alan's brain, like, oh, maybe I could be a part of this thing. But he just can't bring himself to, he rides there the next morning and just can't bring himself to do it. You know, he's going to remain the bully. And then you see later on in a couple episodes, he's not in it too much after that, but, you know, he's still busting balls. You know, he's still carrying on the way Alan always carries on. But it feels so realistic of a bully. It's like, I could think back to bullies, both types of bullies I dealt with. Ones that were definitely physically intimidating for me back then, which were like big, hulking type dudes, kingpin type dudes. And then you could think of ones that were like, what I should just punch this guy out. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
he's a punk.
It's confidence it can be intimidating.
Yeah.
For sure.
Good point.
But yeah, I thought that was a really interesting performance. And yeah, I do like, it's kind of sad because he's like, I like sci-fi too. And I like, it is interesting to hear a little bit from Alan, And then finally, the other character, we must talk about is Harris Trinsky, played by Stephen Lee Shepard. Now, I didn't know this about Stephen Lee Shepard. He's basically done nothing else.
Nothing
In
at
fact,
all?
he's like a huge role-playing game nerd, apparently. And that's like what he's known for, is like he does like writing for that.
That's awesome.
So it's very weird. This character's great.
Oh my
God. I love his delivery, and he's kind of like the sage.
Yes.
Even though he's like only a year older than them, but he seems to know everything, and he's always just sitting around, like he's very calm. He's not really stoned, but he seems like he's stoned. I just absolutely dig this character. I assume it's based on someone that those guys knew. What say you about Harris Trinsky?
I fell in love with this character immediately. When I first met Harris and I first met Millie, I was like, these are my two favorite characters. And I think, I still maintain that after getting all the way through the series. Yeah, he's the guru of the nerds, right? And he's he's 15 to their 14, but he's got this like, worldly wisdom to him, and he's always dispensing advice and his wisdom. And, early on, every time they ran into him in the courtyard or something, they would play like the mystical Hindu music or whatever. Yeah. They stopped doing that after a while. But I love that he stayed in the mix. He was another one of those satellite nerds with Gordon, where it was like he would be, if the group was fleshed out to 5 or 6, he would be in the mix with our 3 heroes, which was really fun. And he talks about, he's a little more sophisticated. He's always seen with his D&D books or his monster manuals, but he talks about his girlfriend and buying her like exotic oils and stuff like that. So you could see like he's got, he's like the modern nerd, right? Like where it's not, he was like he was the original.
That's like exactly what I was going to say. I'm so glad you said that, because that was a dude in 1980, 1981 who knew who he was.
Yeah.
And it's pretty rare. You see he's in the computer lab, he's in AV, he's playing D&D. He's also got a girlfriend. We see her, I think, once or twice too. Yeah. And all of that. And I love his conversations with Daniel. Like he has some conversation where he's like, Daniel's like, you have it pretty worked out or whatever. And he says something, and he's like, yeah, but I don't have sex. And then they both start laughing and the scene cuts or whatever.
It's so good, dude.
Yeah.
And shout out to Carlos the Dwarf.
Yeah, Carlos the Dwarf. And I love I was going to say that, like, the different combinations of characters when they're interacting with each other is always interesting. Like Kim and Sam, like the situation we just brought up.
Yeah.
Others, like where you see like these unusual character combinations. When you have such an ensemble, that becomes kind of one of the attractive things of the show.
Absolutely, Kyle. It's funny because you think like they're saddling themselves by making it this complex and juggling this many characters. But when we're in high school, that's what our world looks like. We know a lot of people. There's a lot of people in a high school. So I think it adds that realism. And I love that you brought up seeing the different characters interact amongst each other. It adds a lot of dimension.
Well, that's why I love the Daniel scene playing D&D with them. I just think that that's such a seminal scene and such a promise of what we might have seen in a second season. Before we go, Dig, though, I would be loath not to bring up the soundtrack. Now, it's worth noting that the soundtrack was one of the major reasons that this show was unavailable for so long in streaming. And it's on Hulu now with its full soundtrack intact. So unlike the Wonder Years, which has been totally butchered. In fact, I joke about the Wonder Years because the Wonder Years famously opened with Joe Cocker's cover of a Beatles song. Now, if you watch it, it is a cover of Joe Cocker's cover of the cover of the Beatles song.
I heard about this.
Yeah, it's like ridiculous.
Oh, man.
What they had to do to the show to get it out is unfortunate. But Robert Lewandowski wrote into us and said, hey, C&D, excited to hear your thoughts on my all-time favorite show. I got to bring up all the great music that was used. From Rush to Billy Joel, all the way to Styx and the Grateful Dead. The song selection really helped make the show so authentic to its 80s setting. Keep up the great work, bros. And remember, rock and roll doesn't come from your brain. It comes from your crotch. It's true. Now, this isn't, as a musician, I must say that this is an interesting show because it's an interesting period. 1980, 1981, right? Punk rock starting to come into its own. New wave starting to come into its own. Disco dying. Old school rock, guitar rock becoming more modernized. So you're starting to see like bands like Aerosmith and Van Halen, who's in this, and others start to really hit their stride. And then we don't really see it too much in here, but this is also the beginning of hip hop and a bunch of other things too. So that turn of the decade, they just happen to be in a perfect place for soundtracks. Now, I often, as I was fantasizing in my mind about what it would be like if it was at Bellport in 2000, like what the soundtrack would be like, it would be fucking awesome. I mean, it would be, I'd create the dopest soundtrack for that era ever. But he's right. I mean, I'm looking at the track listings and the bands that are, so Van Halen, just in the first episode, we see Van Halen, Kenny Loggins, and Styx. By the way, I like that because it's like Van Halen for the freaks, and then I'm All Right by Kenny Loggins, which is an amazing song from Caddyshack good. For the nerds. And I think that was the connection, by the way, is to connect that to Caddyshack, because that was the song from Caddyshack, which they're obsessed with in the movie.
Yeah.
You even see that they have the posters and stuff in there. But then you move on. You get like even Rick Derringer and the Byrds, the Doobie Brothers, Janis Joplin, Kiss, Cheap Trick, Ted Nugent, the Little River Band, Bachman Turner Overdrive is in there. The Faces, we said Rush already, Cream, Billy Joel, the Moody Blues, Journey, the Allman Brothers, Joan Jett, Sam Levine, Kansas, XTC, Bill Conti, Joe Jackson, the Jay Giles Band, Supertramp, the Cars, Bob Seger, Leonard Skinner, Pure Prairie League, Mason Williams, Seals and Croft, Black Flag, Diesel Boy, Warren Zevon, you know, there's Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa, like we said earlier, Dynasty, Heatwave. This is when you're starting to get into some interesting stuff. Foxy. A lot of shit in here, man. What did the first of all, I can't even imagine what the licensing cost was to get this back on Hulu.
Oh, I can't imagine.
I mean, because they got it all. There's 120 songs, by the way.
Yeah. 120?
120.
Holy shit, that's a lot for 18 episodes. Holy shit.
It must cost millions of dollars to get the show back.
Oh, it had to. Yeah.
So I'm so glad they did it. They didn't butcher it like the Wonder Years, which is going to be even more expensive for them to do because those songs are way older.
Oh my God. I can't even imagine.
But what did you make of the soundtrack? I feel like it was such an awesome, essential part of the show. And I'm glad that it's similar to 90210, where they really pulled a lot of music from the time to make those shows pop. And it's unfortunate when you go back and listen, or I watch 90210 once in a while on Amazon, I think I told you this, but there are entire episodes missing because they can't get the rights to the songs.
Wow.
So like you'll go and it'll be like season 2, 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11, 12.
That's a shame.
Like it sucks.
It's a shame. Nobody had the foresight to, it's so strange.
Yeah.
You know? It's so restrictive.
It does suck because obviously this is all written in now into the contracts. But yeah, no one, God, how many times is this mistake going to happen? Because this was a problem with VHSs and Betamax back in the day. Then it was a problem with network TV and cable TV. Then it was a problem with being able to tape your own stuff and like so on and so forth. And no one ever saw like, we should just have this licensing in perpetuity. You know, no one ever was like, you know, like.
Exactly. And I wonder if it was just being cheap. You know, like reach your hand a little deeper in your pocket and pay for those perpetual needle drop rights instead of the one-off rights or whatever, you know?
Yeah, I think it was like, I think literally the rights for a lot of the stuff is like the original airing and then television syndication.
Right.
So
right.
They didn't have the foresight to just say like in syndication or, and so, you know, so it's a shame. But anyway, they really did the hard work here. I really appreciate that. And so I'm wondering what you think of the soundtrack. Yeah,
thank God they maintained that. It's such a big part of the show, such a big part of establishing the nostalgia and really setting the tone for what these kids would have been listening to at that time. You know, I would have liked to see a little more Kiss, but there was at least a little bit in there. That was very indicative of the period. I love everything you said about where the music world was in the late 70s to 80, 81, 82, because that's all true. You know, also another part of that is this was a time where the big bands were breaking up or, you know, the lead man or woman was going solo. So you had Robert Plant doing the solo stuff, Ozzy, Genesis, right? Peter Gabriel, Phil Collins, and Mike Rutherford were you know, started doing their individual efforts at that point. So that was another thing. Music was really dynamic at that point in time.
Definitely. It's great.
And I love the way they sort of punctuated moments and, you know, they bookended moments in the scene. They set the tone for scenes with the music. It's really a huge part of the show, and it flowed. It never seemed out of place. It always flowed really well. Again, hearkening back to a thing like Fast Times, where the music is such a big part of making it feel like an authentic growing up or high school experience. Especially, you know, I knew, like, being around, I'm forgetting, like, this was 3 or 4 years before you were even born. But I saw what the big kids were listening to that were 8, 9 years older than me, which would have been these characters in real life. And that was on the radio, man. That was what they were playing on their cassettes, or maybe still vinyl in some cases, or holdover 8-tracks. And that was on their boom boxes, man. This is what it sounded like. It's so cool.
Yeah, it was great. It's a really nice accompaniment for the sun's coming back up, for the era. And I love this era of music. I love what you said too. I mean, Aerosmith was broken up at this point, I think. And there's like a lot of,
right.
Cause they got back together. And so it's just a lot of, I mean, you'd be loath not to also mention the influence at this point. We're getting like proto metal here and the beginnings of hair metal and everything that would come out of that. But obviously it's really new wave at this point. That's like, and I wish we got a little bit more of that. And I think that if we went until like 81, 82, Devo starts coming out.
Yeah.
Or Devo's out at this point, but they're starting to become popular, obviously Kraftwerk and stuff. So you're starting to get like all the synth in there. I would love to hear like a synth, season 1 episode or season 2 episode 1 just come out with,
oh dude, it would be amazing
with That's Good or something, like ding 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 ding, like some awesome Devo song, and just open up with that, it would be awesome. Very
That's a great point too. If the series kept going, they would have had to jump in the subsequent years, and also they would have been more, you mentioned Black Flag with Daniel's sort of punk arc that he took, but punk would have progressed too. You would have got more Butthole Surfers in the earlier 80s West Coast punk movement. Like Dead Milkmen was just, like all that kind of stuff. Dead Kennedys, all that, yeah, man, if it just went a few more years, you could have had some bitchin' music in this, even definitely. More so.
Definitely. And so I dig that aspect of it. And yeah, it's a lot of what ifs, which is too bad. But nonetheless, like Freaks and Geeks is a wonderful 18 episode run that gives us a glimpse into that era. And I think we could both agree it was a show, even though it's about the past, very much ahead of its time, because everyone loves period pieces now. And I just don't think they were on the right network. I don't think they were in the right place for it. It's almost a shame that HBO or Showtime, in those more embryonic times when at this time, HBO had like 3 series, like they had like Arliss, The Sopranos, and Oz or something like that. And like 6 Feet Under or whatever the hell that show was called. Yeah. And then, but like they weren't really investing in anything at this point. And it's too bad that someone that could have treated the show better didn't see it, because obviously you can't go back and do it anymore with the same people, right? Yeah, like if you didn't do it immediately, like even that they didn't renew it after that for original 13, or didn't even renew it after the pilot to get them right back in, because they're all kids, especially the freaks or the geeks rather. You can't go back and be like, well, it's 2003 and it's like what happened to Family Guy, where it went away for a little while and came back. Well, it's a cartoon, so it doesn't really matter. It's different here. So hopefully I think this show was very inspirational for things to come, and also a nice little appetizer for when we eventually get to the ultimate show about Americana in the past, which is again the Wonder Years.
I can't wait.
We'll put that off though forever. I'm sure we won't do that anytime soon.
I'm so glad you brought up the Wonder Years. It was such a big touchstone for me with watching this. I kept going back to the Wonder Years.
How can it not be?
It's really, I love the differences. I love the contrast. It's not the Wonder Years. It's something different. But that had to be, a little bit of a nagging thing for them creating this series, because I'm sure they didn't want to recreate the Wonder Years. And you already have the different periods from the 60s to the 80s to set it apart. But I'm sure that was something that they had to carry and sort of inevitably be inspired by, for sure.
I agree. All right, Dig. That's it.
All right,
so
my
we
friend.
have about Freaks and Geeks.
You know what?
I was
one
character. Gonna say, is there anything that we didn't touch on something?
The character, this was a jarring thing for me. And I thought you were only going to see him once, but you ended up seeing him a few times. The character of Seidelman. That's the huge dude.
Oh, yeah.
I was calling him Juggernaut.
Yeah, he's famous. That guy's, I can't remember his name, but he's famous. He's in a bunch of like teen movies around that time as like the fat dude. He's in like Varsity Blues and other stuff. Yeah, around this time. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good pull. Yeah, he was in. I was like, what? How can this dude? Because I think the first time you see him, he's like holding Sam in the hallway by the lockers or something, and then they make him into a thing later on, a little bit of a thing. And I was like, wow, that character is enormous. I mean, it's great character design. Great character design in a live action movie, for a live action thing. I loved it.
Yeah, that guy's that guy's like a classic actor in like a few movies, because when you're that guy, that's what you're gonna play. Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm glad you brought him up. I'm looking at my notes and I'm like, I'm pretty pretty much touched on everything somehow. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, this is a fairly long show, but yeah, it was so fun to talk about, dude. There's so much to say. There's so many characters.
I agree.
And don't forget, this boosted the careers of everybody. I mean, Judd Apatow was around for a long time by the time this came out, but this boosted him from journeyman to like one of the most powerful people in Hollywood. Not to mention James Franco and now Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg being this dynamic duo, and I mean, it goes on and on.
Yeah, and I also feel like maybe one day, I've never seen all of it, but maybe one day we'll do Undeclared, which was the show they tried to do again with a lot of the same people.
Never saw
so. And I know that it was important to Judd Apatow, I think, when they were doing that show to get as many of these guys in it. And I think that was like something that I had read recently where very Christopher Guest-like, they want a ensemble that they can bring with them to their projects. And you see that with some of these guys, not all of them. But
yeah, that stable gets so pronounced that when there's one or two missing from a film or a project, you're like, where's so-and-so? Where's Jason Segel? Like, why is Ben Stiller not in this? Like they're like a unit, they operate as a unit. So you always feel like when somebody's missing, you're like, oh, did they have a falling out? And then they pop up in the next thing. You're like, okay, everything's cool with.
I love that. I love that. It's like Tarantino and Nolan, like having just a stable.
Yeah.
You write for them. And I think that's what makes it more powerful. You don't write a role and then go into casting. I don't think it's as strong as saying like, we wrote this for you. Yeah. And I think that's and especially when you mean it, it's very powerful to an actor too, for Christopher Nolan to come from London to New York to meet you or whatever and be like, I wrote this for you. Can
you imagine?
So how do you say no to that? I mean, like if Christopher Nolan was like, I wrote this extra for you, I'd be like, I'd be there in 2 seconds.
Did you see Tenet yet? Did you watch it yet?
No.
I haven't seen it yet either.
I've not. Well, we said already, I've not heard good things, but I also don't I don't believe it. So I think people have it out for Christopher Nolan right now for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah, I guess that whole thing with releasing Tenet, sort of being a proponent for the movie theaters and wanting to hold off and,
Yeah, he ruined that movie, I think, for everyone that would have been such a cool, because that movie was done and it would have been a really nice thing for them to be like, here's a movie during COVID, like God forbid, you would put it up for $20 and we're like, here's a movie,
like people were doing it around him a year prior, actually.
I know it's like I say, Christopher Nolan is one of the, like we famously said, he wanted to make Dunkirk with no script. So this is a dude that clearly is flying by the seat of his pants in many different ways.
A little bit. Good for him. Hey,
yeah,
he's Christopher Nolan.
For sure. I'm sure. By the way, I'm sure Tenet's awesome. I'm just going to say that out loud. I'm going to put that on the record, and then I will let you know if it really is or not.
I like your confidence.
I'm sure.
Yeah, it's too new. We can't do it on KnockBack. We reestablished our rules and our boundaries.
10-year rule. Yeah. So the 10-year rule is that something has to have ended 10 years ago, not begun. So if it's like a TV show or something, it'll have to have ended in 2011 or before, meaning that we can't even do Lost or anything like that yet, which is good.
That's right.
I really don't want to do Lost right now. It's too much. It's way too much effort. That's going to be like a full-time job. That show is there's so much to that show. It's like, oh God.
How many seasons do you know?
I think it's 8.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot for sure. Yeah. That's going to be a big undertaking eventually.
Yeah, it is. All right, Dick.
All right, my friend.
Let's end with the dad joke.
Yep. All right. So Kyle.
Yeah.
A guy says to his friend, do you want a box for your leftovers? Friend says, no, but I'll wrestle you for them.
Yeah, you could tell where that one was going.
You knew.
You could tell. I mean, I don't know what you were going to be about. I was thinking some sort of pugilistic joke. All right. Dig.
All right, my friend.
It was good to see you. Good to talk about Freaks and Geeks. Remember, everyone out there, it's on Hulu, so you can check it out if you have a Hulu subscription. I'm sure you can also buy the Blu-rays or DVDs. Check it out. It's a great show. And I think that if you're nostalgic like we are, and you are if you're listening to the show, then you'll enjoy it very much. Otherwise, thank you for your support on Patreon, patreon.com/laststandmedia, merch, laststandmedia.shop. And what else? Oh, leave us nice reviews on iTunes or whatever. Subscribe on YouTube. Watch it there. Otherwise, that's all we have. We'll see you next time for more KnockBack. Until then, goodbye.
Bye.
KnockBack, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty. KnockBack's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. Stand's theme music is by Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including KnockBack, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.